O Partha, Arjuna, this attitude of mind has been presented to you from the point of view of Jnana, discipline of knowledge. Now hear of the same, from the point of view of Karma, the discipline of selfless action. Equipped with this state of mind, you will be able to completely shake off the shackles of karma, action. 39 Comment here: the word to, indeed, has been used to show that the description of the discipline of action is different from the discipline of knowledge. The term asa has been used for equanimity, which has been described in the preceding verse and which has already been explained in the discipline of knowledge, from the 11th to the 30th verses. When a man discriminates between the body and the soul, he gets established in equanimity automatically, because it is attachment to the body which is an obstacle in the way of equanimity. So this ideal of equanimity has already been presented from the point of view of Sankhya, discipline of knowledge. Now listen to a discourse on equanimity in the context of karma, discipline of action. Imam, this term has been used to explain how this equanimity is attained by the discipline of action and what its importance is. Buddhi yukdoyai partha karma bandham prahyasi. Arjuna was afraid of the sin that would accrue by waging the war. 136:45. But Lord Krishna says that sin does not accrue by waging the war as it is your duty, but it accrues by having attachment and aversion. So if you attain equanimity, no sin will accrue, in your duty of waging the war will not lead you to bondage. In the 7th verse of this chapter, Arjuna asked Lord Krishna to advise him what was good for him. Hence, Lord Krishna answers his query. First, he mentioned the means of Sankhya, discipline of knowledge, and then laid great stress on performance of duty, and told him that there was nothing more welcome to a kshatriya than a righteous war. 231. Then, he told him that no sin would accrue if he had equanimity. 238. Now, he explains the same equanimity in the context of karma, discipline of action. A karmagi performs action to set an example to the masses. Gita 3:20, without any selfish motive. By doing so, he attains equanimity easily. Having attained equanimity, he is easily liberated from the bondage of actions. This 39th verse should have been placed after the 30th verse, as it rightly belonged there, because from the 11th verse to the 30th verse, the Lord explained even-mindedness from the viewpoint of the discipline of knowledge, and now he describes it from the view of discipline of action. So it seems improper to insert these 8 verses, from the 31st to the 38th, here. But really it is not so. The reason is that before describing equanimity in the discipline of action, it is necessary to describe what one ought to do and what one ought not to do. It was Arjuna's duty to wage a righteous war. It was not his duty to abandon war, because by doing so, he would incur sin. So Lord Krishna, in these 8 verses, described what Arjuna ought to do and what he ought not to do. 231-38. Then, he explained equanimity. It means that first from the 11th verse to the 30th verse, he explained equanimity through as elucidation of the real and the unreal, by mentioning that the real is real and the unreal is unreal and none can change these. Then, from the 31st verse to the 38th verse, having explained what one ought to do, and what one ought not, from the 39th verse, he exhorts Arjuna never to desist from his duty, but to always perform duty with even-mindedness, in success and failure. Appendix Karma, discipline of action, is divided into 2 parts: Kartavya Vijnana, the science of duty, and Yoga Vijnana, the science of equanimity. The Lord from the 31st verse to the 37th verse mentioned the science of duty, in which he described the favorable consequences of discharging the duty and adverse consequences of not discharging the duty. Now from this verse to the 53rd verse he mentions the science of equanimity. The equanimity which the Lord mentioned in the preceding verse can be attained both by the discipline of knowledge and the discipline of action. By knowing the discrimination between the body division and the self-division and renouncing affinity with the body division, is the discipline of knowledge, while by knowing the duty division and the non-duty division and by renouncing what ought not to be done and discharging one's duty, is the discipline of action. A man by following one of the 2 disciplines should attain equanimity. The reason is by attaining equanimity a man is freed from the bondage of action. One is Dharma Sastra, Pirvamimamsa, the scripture for duty, and one is Moksha Sastra, Uttaramimamsa, the scripture for salvation. Here from the 31st verse to the 37th verse, there is description of Dharma Sastra, while from the 39th verse to the 53rd verse there is description of Moksha Sastra. By Dharma Sastra, discharging one's duty, there is both kinds of progress, mundane and spiritual. In Dharma Sastra, the discharge of one's duty is important. Either call it dharma or duty, it is one and the same. Not to do what ought to be done is non-discharge of duty, Vaisesika 1/3, 239. And to do what ought not to be done is also non-discharge of duty. Duty is that in which a person, having renounced his desire for pleasure, pleases others, and which involves his own welfare as well as the welfare of others. By discharging one's duty, yoga, equanimity, is naturally attained. Without discharging one's duty a man can't attain equanimity, Gita 6/3. Having attained equanimity, knowledge of truth is naturally attained, which is the result of both karmaga, the discipline of action, and jnanaga, the discipline of knowledge. In this path of selfless action, there is neither loss of effort, nor any adverse result. Even a little practice of this discipline, dharma, protects hope from great danger, of birth and death. 40 Comment. Lord Krishna has explained the importance of disinterested action in the latter part of the 39th and this 40th verse in 4 ways. By it, one becomes free from shackles of actions. 2. There is no loss in effort. 3. There is no adverse result. 4. Even a little practice of it, dharma, protects one from great fear. In this path of disinterested action, there is no loss of attempt, viz., the partial practice of this yoga, discipline of disinterested action, has its corresponding benefit. The desire to attain equanimity is the beginning of equanimity. Such a beginning never gets wasted because desire for attaining the real is also real. In this, means that in this world human beings are authorized to attain equanimity. All other bodies, births, are to enjoy worldly pains and pleasures. There is no opportunity for them to do away with attachment and aversion because pleasures can be enjoyed only by having attachment and aversion. If there are no attachment and aversion, no pleasure can be enjoyed, and such actions will lead to spiritual discipline. Pratyavayanavidyate actions which are performed with a desire for fruits, can give adverse result. If there is any error in the pronunciation of incantations, or in performing sacrifice, etc. Suppose a man performs sacrifice for the birth of a son, but if it is not performed according to scriptures, it might result in the death of a member of the family, instead of blessing him with a son. Sometime, if the result is not quite contrary, it may be less harmful, as the son may be born crippled. But one who performs actions without having any desire for fruits becomes equanimous, and so there is no adverse result from his effort. What is adverse result? Unevenness of mind is an adverse result. Attachment and aversion is uneven-mindedness. This uneven-mindedness leads to a cycle of birth and death. But when a man becomes equanimous, attachment and aversion are rooted out, and on annihilation of attachment and aversion, there is no unevenness of mind, and therefore any adverse result is out of the question. Even a little practice of this discipline of disinterested action, which brings about equanimity, protects one from the great fear of birth and death. So unlike action for fruits, which ends after its fruits, it does not perish, viz., its fruit is not wealth or property, which are perishable. Equanimity, which a striver attains by facing favorable and unfavorable circumstances, gets fixed in him and becomes permanent. A devotee, striver, deviating from the path of yoga, having enjoyed heavenly pleasures for many years and having taken birth in the houses of righteous persons, does not lose knowledge or even-mindedness gained in his previous birth. Gita 6:40-45, because this knowledge or even-mindedness is real. Dharma, duty, is used in 2 senses, charity, viz., kindness, in giving help, money, food, clothes, etc., to the poor and suffering people. 2. Discharging one's duty according to the ordinance of scriptures. By performing one's duty, without desiring its fruit, one develops equanimity automatically, because it is axiomatic. Therefore, here, equanimity has been called dharma, duty. Something noteworthy about equanimity. Some people opine constant remembrance of God is not useful unless there is concentration of mind. But the Gospel of the Gita does not attach much importance to this opinion. It attaches more importance to equanimity. According to the Gwai, a striver who has attained equanimity is an exalted soul. Even when a man is imbued with all qualities, if he does not gain equanimity, according to the Gita, he cannot be called a perfect soul. This equanimity is of two kinds, as of the mind and of the self. The Lord pervades everywhere equally. One who gets oneself established in him gains victory over the world and is liberated. But this equanimity of self can be known by equanimity of the mind. Gita 5:19. Equanimity of the mind consists in remaining even-minded in success and failure. Gita 2:48. Such a person remains even-minded in praise and reproach, success and failure, profit and loss, pleasure and pain, etc. Gita 5:20. This sort of equanimity never perishes, and it results in nothing but salvation. Whatever virtuous actions, such as penance, charity and pilgrimage, etc., are performed by a man, these perish after giving fruit, but equanimity does not perish, and it leads man to salvation or God realization. Gita 5/3. While concentration of mind may lead him to accomplishments, siddhis, but not to salvation. Appendix. The Lord has mentioned the glory of equanimity in 4 ways in the 39th and 40th verses. By equanimity a man shakes off the shackles of karma, action. 2. There is no loss of effort. 3. There is no adverse result of this effort. 4. Even a little practice of this discipline, dharma, protects one from the great danger of birth and death. Though in the first point the 3 remaining points are included, yet there is a little difference in them, as the Lord first in the normal way declares that by equanimity a man shakes off the shackles of karma, action. The reason of bondage is the attachment to the modes, viz., it is his assumed affinity with prakriti, matter, and its evyuts. Gita 13:21. In equanimity there is no affinity with prakriti and its evyuts, therefore the man is freed from the shackles, bondage, of action. As in the world many virtuous and sinful actions are done, but those actions don't bind us because we have no relationship with them. Similarly, the even-minded person has no relationship with the actions done by his body. 2. If equanimity merely begins, viz., there is an aim of attaining equanimity, there is inquisitiveness to attain it, then this beginning is not destroyed. The reason is that the aim to attain the imperishable is also imperishable, while the aim to gain the perishable is also perishable. The aim to gain the perishable leads to destruction, fall, while the aim to attain equanimity leads to salvation. Gita 6:44. 3. There is no adverse result of this equanimity. If there is any error in pronouncing the sacred text in the performance of actions which are done with a desire for fruits, the result of those actions can be adverse. But if there is equanimity in life, and an error is committed, and if there is slip and carefulness, the action does not give adverse result, bondage. For example, if a paid servant while lighting a lantern in the dark drops it and breaks it, we are angry with him. But if our friend who never wants anything from us, drops the lantern and it is broken, we don't get angry but ask him not to mind it, as it matters little. Therefore he who performs actions with the desire for fruit, may have adverse result of his actions, but how can the result of the actions of the person, who doesn't covet any fruit, be adverse? It can't be. 4. Even a little equanimity protects one from the great danger of birth and death, viz., it results in salvation. As actions done with an interested motive perish after bearing fruit, in that way even a little equanimity does not perish after bearing fruit, but it only leads to salvation. If virtuous actions such as religious sacrifice, charity and penance, etc., are performed with a desire for fruit, their result is perishable, gain of money, wealth and heaven. There is a mythological story that devotee performed a religious sacrifice in order to get a son who would kill Indra. In that sacrifice the sages performed the sacrifice with the sacred text Indrasitram Vivardhasva. In the word Indrasitaru, if there is sastatit Purusa compound word, it means Indra's enemy, and if there is Bhavrihi compound word, it means he whose enemy is Indra. By the difference of samasa, compound word, there is difference in sound. Therefore in sastatit Purusa compound word, the word Indrasita's last letter true will be pronounced with Udita sound, while in Bhavrihi compound word, the word Indrasitru's first letter I will be pronounced with Udita sound. The aim of the sages was to do the anti-data pronunciation of the word Indrasitru, but they did idiodata pronunciation. So because of the difference in sound in the pronunciation of the sacred text there was adverse result, and thus Indra became the killer of Vrtrasura. Tvasta's son. Therefore it is said etc. And if they err profound without the desire for fruit, their result is imperishable, salvation. Thus virtuous actions such as sacrifice, charity and penance etc. can bear two types of fruit, but the fruit of equanimity is only salvation. As a traveler, while traveling stops on the way or sleeps, he has not to go back to the place from where he started his journey, but he has covered the distance up to the place where he stops or sleeps. Similarly, as much equanimity is attained in life, that never perishes. Svalpamapyasyadan nasyitriyate mahato bayarsi. Even a little feeling of disinterest is true, while fear even being great is untrue. As for a bundle of cotton, a lot of fire is not required. The cotton may be 1 bundle or 100 bundles. A matchstick is enough to bum it. When one matchstick is applied to the cotton itself becomes fire and helps in burning the remaining cotton. In the same way, detachment is fire and the world is cotton. Being detached from the world itself perishes, because the world in fact has no existence at the root, so one can't be attached to it. The least renunciation is real and the biggest action is unreal. An action ends while renunciation is endless. Therefore a reaction such as sacrifice, charity and penance etc. perish after giving fruit. Gita 8:28. But renunciation of the fruit of action, never perishes. Tyagakantiranandram, Gita 12:12. By renouncing the egoistic notion only, infinite universes are renounced, because this sense of ego has sustained the entire universe. Gita 7:5. There may be a big heap of grass, can it face fire? It may be very dark, can it face light? If there is a fight between darkness and light, will darkness win? Similarly, if there is a fight between ignorance and knowledge, will ignorance win? Can the greatest fear face fearlessness? Equanimity, even if it is a little, is complete, and fear, even if great, is incomplete. A little equanimity is great because it is true, and the great fear is little, without existence, because it is untrue. What is the import of calling equanimity or the feeling of disinterestedness a little? The feeling of disinterestedness is great, but we understand and experience it a little, so it has been called a little. In fact, our understanding is a little. Equanimity is not a little. Our view has not grasped it fully, so there is defect in our view, not in equanimity. Similarly, we have valued the unreal more. It does not mean that the unreal is great, but value accorded by us is great. Therefore, if we value the real more, the real will become great, viz., its value will be realized, and if we don't value the unreal will become a little. In fact, the unreal may be great or a little, it has no existence. Nasato vidyate bhava, and the real may be great or a little, its existence is ever present. Nabhavo vidyate sara. Therefore in Upanishads the Supreme Soul has been called smaller than a molecule and the biggest of all or ai. Ian Mahato Mahiyan, Kaha. 112:20. Svatasvitra 3:20. Links in the next verse. Lord Krishna explains to Arjuna how to attain equanimity. O joy of the Kuras, in this blessed path, the intellect is determinate and concentrated, whereas the intellect of the undecided, infirm, is scattered in many directions, and is endlessly diverse. 41. Comment to a seeker of God realization: the intellect is determinate and single-pointed, viz., he has only one decision, and that is to attain equanimity, in the form of God realization. Attachment to the world is the main obstacle to this attainment of equanimity, and that can be removed through determinate intellect. Why is determinate intellect one? The reason is that in it there is renunciation of desire for worldly objects etc. This renunciation of desire is singular, whether it pertains to wealth and riches or honor and praise. But there are objects of different types, and a person wants to acquire these. Just as there are different kinds of objects, such as different kinds of sweets, in the same way, there are endless desires for acquiring numerous objects of various types in various ways. Therefore, a desirous person cannot have one intellect. In the discipline of action, in this verse, and in the discipline of devotion, in 930, there is mention of intellect, which is determinate and single-pointed, but it is not so in the discipline of knowledge. The reason is that in a discipline of knowledge, one comes to know the self first, and then his intellect becomes determinate and pointed, while in the discipline of action, as well as devotion, it is the determinate intellect which comes first, and then it is followed by self-realization. Therefore, In the discipline of knowledge there is importance of knowledge, while in the disciplines of devotion and action, there is importance of a single-minded pursuit. Bahu Sakohayananti Iskabudavyavasayanami. The infirm in mind being desire-ridden, clings to pleasure and prosperity, and so the intellect of such persons grow endlessly. For example, they may have a desire to get a son. The means adopted for the fulfillment of other desire, such as medicine, incantation, oblation and blessings of a saint etc., are branches of the same desire. Similarly, a man wants to get money. Of this is one desire, intellect, and to get it through business, service, theft, robbery, cheating etc., are many branches of that intellect. Such a man, with endless desires, having many branches, cannot even take decision about God realization. Appendix. The real aim is only one. Unless a man has a singular aim, he has endless aims, and there are numerous branches of each aim. He has endless desires, and the means for the fulfillment of each desire are also many. Link. The ways of the infirm in mind, worldly people, have been described in the next 3 verses. Arjuna, those who are obsessed by desires, who look upon heaven as the supreme goal and argue that there is nothing beyond heaven and pleasures, and who are devoted to the letter of the Vedas, are unwise. They make this type of flowery speeches recommending many acts of various kinds, for the attainment of pleasure and prosperity, and with rebirth as their fruit. 42-43. Kamatmanai, desire-ridden are those, whose sole aim in life is to hunt after enjoyment. They think that it is nothing but desire, which inspires a man to action, and without it, a man is stone dead. Moreover, they identify themselves with desires. But the fact is, that a man himself is a fragment of God, and thus, is eternal, while desires are fleeting, and these increase and decrease. The self and desire are totally distinct. But desire 170 ridden people never realize this distinction, and it is only out of delusion that they identify themselves with desire. Svargapura. They look upon heaven and its pleasure as their supreme goal, and all their efforts are directed towards that base end. Here the term Svargapari refers to such men who have faith and belief in heaven etc., as described in the Vedas and scriptures. They are interested in the Vedas only for the sake of the ritualistic contents, which deal with earthly and heavenly pleasure. The aim of their life is to enjoy celestial pleasure here and hereafter, rather than to attain God realization or emancipation. They cannot discriminate between the real and the unreal, the perishable and the imperishable. Such unwise persons utter flowery words of the Vedas, which describe and recommend various acts for the attainment of pleasure and prosperity. Here, the word puspatam has been used to show that such speech is just flowery with an attractive appearance, without bearing any permanent fruit. Satisfaction comes out of fruit only, not from flowers and leaves. That flowery way, instead of giving any permanent and eternal fruit, gives fruit which prolongs the wheel of birth. In language, flowery importance is attached to pleasure, and attachment to pleasure is the cause of birth. Gita 13:21. Kriyavasabhulambangos variegatim prati. That flowery utterance deals with a number of rituals for the attainment of pleasure and prosperity. In these rituals there is abundance of different kinds of rites, involving various methods, actions, objects and much strenuous physical labor. Gita 13:21. Those whose minds are carried away by such flowery words, who are attracted towards pleasures and who are deeply attached to pleasure and prosperity, cannot attain the determinate intellect, concentrated in God. 44. Their minds are carried away by such flowery language, that there is great pleasure in heaven, there are celestial damsels, a blissful garden, and there is nectar etc. Bhag is varya prasaktanam. Pleasures of 5 senses: sound, touch, color, taste, smell, comfort to the body, and desire for respect and praise are bhaga. The worldly enjoyments, accumulation of money and material to enjoy those worldly pleasure, is called aivarya, prosperity. Those who cling to pleasure and prosperity are called bhagas varya prasaktanam. Such people are called demoniacal, asura. In Sanskrit, asa stands for life breath, and he who wants to maintain life breath is an asura. Such people, who instinctively cling to pleasure and prosperity, cannot attain the determinate intellect to realize God, because their intellect has become impure. Similarly, the people who have pride for their being learned, by acquiring the worldly arts or science or knowledge etc., cannot attain the determinate intellect, decision, to realize God. Something noteworthy: all-gracious God, by his grace has bestowed discrimination. The people possessing the mode of passion who are being described here have been called people possessing demoniacal traits in the 16th chapter by the Lord, 16,111, 16/16, upon human beings, so that they may attain God or salvation. But human beings, giving a cold shoulder to this discrimination, cling to pleasure like birds and animals. They forget that enjoyment of pleasure is not the goal of human life, but its supreme object is the attainment of perfection, and all the circumstances, whether favorable or unfavorable, they are placed in, are means to attain perfection, God realization. So they cannot have the sole desire for God realization. The fact is that worldly pleasures and objects are not a real obstacles to God realization, but attachment to these is the main hindrance. So long as this attachment continues, not to talk of God realization, the people cannot even make up their minds to attain God, because their minds are drawn away by worldly pleasure and prosperity, etc. Appendix: if there is any obstacle to the attainment of salvation, it is the desire for pleasures and prosperity, accumulation of wealth. As an ensnared fish can't move ahead, similarly a man, entangled in pleasures and prosperity, can't move ahead towards God. Not only this, but the man attached to pleasures and prosperity can't even have the determinate intellect to realize God. He who regards the world as true, to him karmaga will quickly lead to self-realization. A karmagi serves the world by discharging his duty, viz., he does every action for the welfare of others in a disinterested manner. He feels happy with the happiness of others and is sad, moved, with the sadness of others. By feeling happy, seeing others happy, his desire for pleasure is wiped out, and by being moved at the sufferings of others, his desire for prosperity, accumulation, is wiped out. In fact, the real service is rendered by the person who has totally renounced the desire for pleasure and prosperity, otherwise the service is fake. But if the aim is real, for the welfare of others, the fake service also turns into real service. Linked to confirm something, it is necessary that one should view the pros and cons of a matter. In the previous 3 verses, there is the description of the infirm in mind who are obsessed by desires. Now, Lord Kr1 inspires Arjuna to attain the ideal by being established in the eternal existence, God, transcending the 3 gunas, attributes, and being free from all desires. O Arjuna, the Vedas deal with the 3 gunas, attributes, and their evolutes. Be free from those attributes, rise above the polarity of opposites, remain balanced, be unconcerned about the meeting of wants and preservation of what has been already attained, and get established in the self. 45 Comment here, the reference is to the ritualistic portions of the Vedas, which deal with the 3 gunas, attributes, and their evolutes, in the form of worldly and heavenly enjoyment. The purpose is not to censure the Vedas, but to glorify the selfless spirit. In reference to a diamond, a piece of glass is compared, the aim is to eulogize the diamond, rather than to censure glass. The Vedas do not only deal with means to satisfy desires of the worldly-minded people, but they also contain sublime and elevating ideas on God and the means to realize Him. Nistragunyo Bhavarjuna. O Arjuna, be free from the evolutes of these attributes, viz., be free from worldly enjoyment, as well as means of attaining such enjoyment. For a striver to transcend the worldly enjoyment, it is inevitable to be free from the pairs of opposites such as attachment and aversion, etc., because these are his real enemies and are the stumbling block in his spiritual progress. Gita 3:34. Here, Lord Krishna orders Arjuna to rise above the pairs of opposites, because through their deluding nature, human beings are enveloped in utter ignorance. Gita 7:27. When the striver gets rid of this delusion, he can worship him with a firm resolve. Gita 7:28. By transcending these pairs of opposites, he is easily freed from bondage. 5/3. One becomes undiluted. 15:5. And he is not bound. 4:22. So the Lord wants him to be free from the pairs of opposites. Another aspect is that if a person develops attachment for one person or a thing, he is sure to develop aversion to other persons or things. By having such attachment to the world, an aspirant turns indifferent to God. This indifference is a sort of aversion to God. But if one develops true devotion to God, without having any attachment or aversion to the world, he develops total disinclination for it. This total disinclination has 3 stages. In the first stage, the aspirant has no hatred for unfavorable circumstances, but there is apeksa, neglect. In the second stage, there is udasanata, unconcernedness, while in the third stage, there is total disinclination. In the last stage, total disinclination, attachment and aversion, are totally wiped out. If this process is considered minutely, we find that in apeksa there remain impressions of attachment and aversion. In udasanata the feelings of attachment and aversion remain, while in total disinclination there are neither impressions nor feelings of attachment and aversion. In this state, attachment and aversion are totally wiped out. Nityasavastal.t The advice is to rise above the pairs of opposites and to get established in the omnipresent and everlasting God. Dvandva means having opposite feelings for something, as the feelings of attachment and aversion, pleasure and pain etc., for the world. This misleads an aspirant to bondage. Do not have a desire even for the provision of the means required, yoga, and the preservation of what has already been attained, because I provide for and preserve all for those who have exclusive devotion for Met. Gita 9:22. Having the aim of God realization, get established in the self, eternal existence or God. Appendix Nerdvandva. In fact, the discrimination between the insentient sentient, real unreal, eternal transitory, perishable imperishable etc., is also a pair of opposites. The desire for gain and security is also a duality. Because of duality all is God. This reality is not realized. The reason is, when all is God, then how can duality between the sentient, self, and the insentient, matter, subsist? Therefore the Lord has declared himself both immortality as well as death, and sat as well as at. Unreal. Gita 9:19. Link in the next verse. Lord Kr1 explains what one achieves by transcending the 3 gunas, attributes. As on obtaining a reservoir of water flooded on all sides there is no use for a small reservoir of water. So a Brahmana, who obtains enlightenment, has the same use for all the Vedas, or say no use at all. 46 Yoga means providing unacquired things, and ksma means preservation of the things procured. Though here it is the context of the discipline of disinterested action, yet it seems proper to take it as the discipline of devotion, because Lord Krishna, time and again, orders Arjuna to be his devotee, and he also accepts him as his devotee in 4/3. He also takes the responsibility of provision and protection. 9:22. Comment. A small reservoir of water is useful in a place where there is no other source of water. But nobody ever pays any attention to such a reservoir of water where there is a big reservoir of pure water. Moreover, that such a small reservoir of water becomes dirty and impure and cannot be used for drinking purpose, after washing and bathing in it. But water from a large stream remains clean and pure, even after washing and bathing in it. Likewise oblations, charities, penances and pilgrimages etc., mentioned in the Vedas, are of use to those who are ignorant. But these become meaningless to the illumined souls who have realized God. The same kind of comparison has been made, in the 70th verse, that the emancipated souls are like sea, as several rivers fall into it but its magnitude remains the same. Similarly the illumined souls remain undisturbed though several kinds of pleasure and enjoyment merge into them. A great soul who possesses knowledge of the Lord, the Vedas and the scriptures is called Brahmanasya Vijnata. By using the term divan, Lord Krishna means to say that the great soul after realizing God transcends the 3 attributes, modes, rises above the pairs of opposites, viz., becomes free from attachment and aversion, gets established in the self and remains unconcerned about provision and preservation. He always remains devoted to God. Appendix. There is no end of worldly pleasures. There are endless universes and there are endless pleasures in them. But if they are renounced and one becomes detached from them, they come to an end. Similarly there are endless desires. But if they are renounced, they come to an end and the man becomes desireless. Link in the 39th verse. Lord Kr1 asks Arjuna to listen to the discourse on an even mind. In the next verse he orders him to perform his duty in order to attain that equanimity, evenness of mind. Your right is only to perform your duty, but never to claim its fruit. Do not be the cause of the fruit of action nor let your attachment be for an action. 47 Comment. Your right is to perform your duty, you are free in it, because no other bodies as those of animals and birds etc., are free to perform new actions. Only human beings are eligible to perform new actions. The gods can perform new actions and can bestow money and material upon human beings, according to the ordinance of the Lord, but they are so steeped in enjoyment that it is not possible for them to perform new actions. They are destined only to reap the fruit of their meritorious deeds. The creatures in hell also cannot perform new actions as they suffer the fruits of their actions. God has bestowed this human birth, the very last of all births, so that by performing new actions in the form of selfless service to others, a person may achieve salvation and be freed from the bondage of the cycle of birth and death. If he remains engaged in selfish actions, these will result in bondage. In case he is given to indolence and heedlessness, he will follow a cycle of birth and death. Therefore, the Lord advises human beings to render selfless services for common good. The term karmani has been used in singular number to emphasize the fact that though man has to perform several duties in his life, he can perform only one at a particular time. Arjuna, belonging to the warrior class, has several duties, such as fighting, generosity and bravery, etc. But presently he could perform only one of these to wage the war. A vital fact in the births of others, i.e., those of birds, animals, insects and even gods, the creatures can reap the fruits of their actions but cannot perform new actions. However, there are two things about human life, viz., reaping the fruits of deeds of earlier lives, and secondly performing new ones. God has bestowed upon man this human body, so that by performing new virtuous actions without having a desire for their fruits, he may attain God realization or salvation. As far as the fruit of his previous actions is concerned, it may come in the form of favorable and unfavorable circumstances. He cannot change those circumstances, but can make proper use of these, and these can lead him to salvation, if he uses these properly. An important fact, which needs attention, is that favorable or unfavorable circumstances cannot make a man happy or sad. It is merely his ignorance which makes him happy or sad as he identifies himself with those circumstances and becomes the experiencer of happiness or sadness. If he gives a serious thought, he will come to know that the external circumstance can't make his internal self either happy or sad. He should make proper use of the favorable circumstances by serving others, and of the undesirable ones by renouncing the desire to enjoy pleasure. In unfavorable circumstances, a man should not be perturbed but should think that the sins committed to get pleasure are perishing in the form of unfavorable circumstances, and this thought is a kind of repentance for the sins committed. Secondly, it is a forewarning to us that we shall have to face adverse consequences if we commit sins again. So, we should perform actions for the welfare of all creatures, rather than for our own pleasure. For insects, birds and animals, etc., the fruit of past actions and also the present actions are only to work out their destinies. But in case of human beings, the fruit of past actions as also the present activities are the means for their salvation. You cannot claim the fruit of action, because you are not free in getting it, which is dispensed by the Lord. If you perform actions with a desire for fruits, you will get into bondage. Gita 5:12. It is the desire for fruit which makes a person an agent for actions. With the passing away of desire, a sense of doership is gone. Obliteration of the sense of doership does not lead a man to bondage. It means that a man is much more entangled in desires. Secondly, all actions are performed with the help of worldly objects and persons. So it is dishonest to desire the fruit of those actions for only one's own self. The desire for fruit of actions is not beneficial for human beings. Never lay claim to its fruit. This expression proves that it is up to a man whether he lays claim to the fruit of an action or not. He is free in this respect. The term phelezu has been used in the plural, because a man by performing an action desires several fruits such as riches, respect and reputation, etc. The means to be free from the desire for fruits of actions are as follows. Desire causes a feeling of lacking something. Its fulfillment makes one a slave. Its non-fulfillment causes suffering. The pleasure derived out of fulfillment of desire gives birth to new desires, and a man goes on getting interested in performing new actions, in order to reap their fruit. By understanding this fact in the right perspective, a man becomes free from the desire for the fruit of action. Actually, God realization does not depend on actions but on feelings and knowledge, because he is ever attained. It is the desire for fruits which is an obstacle to God realization. 2. Actions have a beginning and an end. These are not eternal. So, how can their fruits be eternal? But the self is eternal. How can the eternal get any benefit from the perishable? By understanding this fact, one becomes detached from the world and attains God realization. In order to be free from the desire for fruits of actions, an aspirant should have discrimination as well as feelings to serve others. Discrimination will be helpful to an aspirant in renouncing his comforts, while the feelings of service to others will enable him to do good to others. By doing so, a striver can follow the discipline of disinterested action, in the right sense. Let you not be responsible for the fruits of action. It means that you should not have the least attachment for the body, senses, mind and intellect etc., because attachment for these will make you responsible for the fruit of action. In the 11th verse of the 5th chapter also, Lord Krishna, by using the term kevale only, wants to say that the follower of the discipline of disinterested action should abandon feeling of mindness for the body, mind, intellect and senses. If a striver becomes the agent, doer, of a virtuous action, even without having a desire for its fruit, he is held responsible for the fruit of the action, because by doing so he has accepted his affinity for the mind, intellect and senses etc., which are unreal. Actually, we have no affinity with them, they have their affinity with the world. When anybody else performs action for the good of others, we do not accept our affinity for the action and its fruit and so are not held responsible. We should adopt the same attitude in the case of our own actions also, so that we may not be held responsible for the fruit of actions. Let your attachment not be to an action, because by leaning towards an action, you will become lazy and idle, and like the desire for fruit it will also mislead you to bondage. The reason is that indolence and prolonged sleep etc. also give pleasure, viz., tamasica joy, Gita 18-39, which misleads either to the lower births of insects, birds and beasts etc., or to infernal regions, Gita 14:18. It means that attachment misleads to bondage and is the cause of birth in good and evil wombs, Gita 13:21. You should not be attached to an action by thinking that it will lead you to progress, here and hereafter, because the real essence is beyond action or inaction. In this verse, the Lord means to say that a striver should remain detached from objects, men, action, incidents, circumstances and physical, subtle, causal bodies etc., without having the least affinity for them. In this verse there are 4 points which need attention. Your right is to perform your duty, action, only. 2. Never lay claim to its fruit. 3. Do not be the cause of the fruit of action. 4. Let your attachment be not to an action. Out of these 4 points, the first and the fourth have the same theme, as both of these lay emphasis on the performance of duty or action. Similarly, the second and the third points have the same theme, as in both of these it is mentioned that you should not desire or be the cause of the fruit of action. It means that, by leaning towards inaction you will have affinity to tamasica temperament, such as idleness and laziness. By having attachment for action and its fruit you will have affinity for rajasica temperament. But when a striver is free from laziness, idleness, actions, fruit of actions, etc., he gets the joy born of knowledge and light, and having attachment for it, he has affinity to sattvika temperament. Affinity with these is the cause of birth and death. Therefore, a striver should not have attachment for either of them. Doing one's duty without having any attachment to them is called the discipline of disinterested action. Appendix 1 is the division of actions and 1 is the division of fruit, result. A man's right is in the division of actions, performance of duty, not in the division of fruit. The reason is that performance of duty is under the control of a man, while awarding the result of past actions is ordained by destiny, viz., prarabdha. If we perceive from the viewpoint of karmaga whatever material, thing, ability and power we have obtained, that is prarabdha, and their proper use, viz., by assuming them not as ours or for us, but by assuming them as others and for them, and rendering service with them to others, is purusartha. The important fact about karmaga is protection of the rights of others by performing one's duty and renouncing the fruit of action, viz., renouncing one's right. By protecting the right of others, old attachment is wiped out, and by renouncing one's own right, new attachment is not born. Thus when old attachment is wiped out and new attachment is not born, a man becomes Vairagya, free from attachment. By becoming Vairagya one realizes the self. The reason is in attaining self-realization. Attachment to the unreal things is the only obstacle. Raga, it means that attachment, attraction, of the mind to objects, persons and actions is the main sign, mark, of ignorance. As when the hollow of a tree catches fire, it does not remain green anymore but it is dried up. Similarly, he who has caught fire in the form of attachment can't attain peace. Link. After asking Arjuna to perform his duty, in the preceding verse, the Lord describes how he should remain even-minded while performing actions. O Dhanapajna, the conqueror of wealth, perform actions, duties, being steadfast in the path of yoga, renouncing attachment, having become even-minded in success and failure, and that equanimity, equilibrium, is called yoga. 48. Comment. You can become indifferent only if you have no attachment for actions, their fruits, place, time, incidents, circumstances, bodies and minds etc., which belong to matter, because without being indifferent to actions, these cannot lead you to salvation. Sadhyasarno, be it the renunciation of attachment will result in evenness of mind. A man should be even-minded, in favorable and unfavorable circumstances, in honor and dishonor, and in praise and reproach. A follower of the discipline of disinterested action should be so even-minded while performing actions, that he should not bother about their accomplishment or non-accomplishment, forgetting the fruit or not, forgetting salvation or not. He should remain devoted to his duty. If an aspirant has not realized detachment and equanimity, he should aim at evenness of mind. By having this approach, a striver will attain equanimity fully, which will lead to God realization or self-realization. 253. Lord Krishna says that the essence of true yoga lies in even-mindedness, in success, as well as failure. The person who keeps the mind ever in the poised state. While explaining this verse, Sri Sankaracharya writes, So Dhanapajna, being established in yoga, perform actions only for God without even having the desire to please Him. Knowledge gained by purification of mind as a result of the desireless, without the desire for fruits, actions is called siddhi, success, and whatever is contrary to it, lack of knowledge, is ascetic, failure. Perform actions being even-minded amidst success or failure. This evenness of mind or equanimity is called yoga, is called steadfast in yoga. The sameness of mind should remain intact from the beginning of an action to its end. It should not be a temporary phase, otherwise the propensities of attraction and repulsion will go on coming up. We should never allow such propensities to develop. Samatviraj. Yoga Usit. Yoga is nothing but equanimity, i.e., equanimity is the embodiment of Lord Himself. Further, in the 19th verse of the 5th chapter, Lord Krishna says, those whose mind is established in equanimity, have conquered the mortal plane, because Brahma, the Absolute, is flawless and equanimous, hence they are established in the eternal. Here, yoga has been defined as equanimity, while in the 23rd verse of the 6th chapter, it will be defined as the state which is free from the contact of pain. Actually, both the definitions are the same. When a man suffers from ringworm or itching eczema, he gets satisfaction by scratching it. The pleasure of itching is followed by the painful sensation of burning. Being the result of a disease, both these sensations are really painful. Similarly, the pleasure and pain received from attachment to the world are equally painful. Therefore, yoga can either be defined as the state free from the contact of pain, viz., free from pleasure and pain, or equanimity and pleasure and pain both are the same. It means that through all actions performed by physical, subtle and causal bodies should render service to the world, without having any selfish motive. This alone will lead to equanimity. Something noteworthy about intellect and equanimity. Intellect is of two kinds, indeterminate and determinate. The intellect of those whose aim is to enjoy worldly pleasure and prosperity is indeterminate. Gita 2:44, while the intellect of those whose aim is equanimity and salvation is determinate. Indeterminate intellects are endlessly diverse, while the determinate one is single. Those whose intellects are endlessly diverse are themselves undecided, Gita 2:41, and are worldly, but those whose intellect is single, have rightly resolved, Gita 9:30, and they are strivers. Equanimity is of two kinds, of the mind and of the self. To remain even, in favorable or unfavorable circumstances, without having any attachment or aversion, is equanimity of the mind, while equanimity of the self is union with God. 253. There is a distinction between the worldly people and strivers. The goal of the worldly people is to enjoy pleasure and prosperity, and their intellects are not determinate but are scattered in many directions and are endlessly diverse. On the other hand, the strivers' intellects are determinate, and the strivers in their practical life maintain equanimity in success and failure, profit and loss, and favorable and unfavorable circumstances, without having attachment and aversion. Such strivers conquer the mortal plane and are established in the eternal. Gita 5:19. Appendix and Patafijala Yoga Darsana. The control of the mind has been called Yoga Yogasitavrti Narodha, half. As a result of this yoga, the seer rests in the self-taught Drashtus Vanupvastinam, 1/3. Thus in Patanjali Yoga Darsana, what has been called the result of yoga, the Gita declares the same as Yoga Samadvam Yoga Usate, Gita 6:23. It means that the Gita declares that when a man, self, is totally detached from the mind and naturally rests in the self, that state is called yoga. By getting established in this yoga, equanimity, there is no deviation from it, therefore it is also called nityoga, eternal union. When the mind is controlled, nirvikalpishta, state of cessation of thoughts, ensues. But when by equanimity a man rests in the self, that is nirvikalpabodha, knowledge of truth, or sihajavasta, self-realization. Nirvikalpabodha is not a state, but it transcends all states. It is their illuminator and is the result of all yoga disciplines. The states are both nirvikalpa, without distraction, and savikalpa, with distraction, but bodha is only nirvikalpa. Thus the yoga of the Gita is more remarkable than that of Patanjali Yoga Darsana. The person who is not of mudha, deluded, and ksipta, volatile, inclination, but is of viksipta, sometimes constant, sometimes volatile, inclination, is eligible, qualified, for yoga of Patanjali Yoga Darsana. But all the persons who want to attain God are eligible for the yoga of the Gita, God realization. Not only this, but the person who, instead of attaching importance to pleasure and prosperity, attaches importance to this yoga, such a seeker of the yoga, equanimity, also transcends the fruit of Vedic rituals performed with some motive. Gita 6:44. Link in the next verse, Lord Krishna explains the superiority of equanimity, which has been described from the 39th verse to the 48th verse, to a motivated action, viz., action with a selfish motive. Odhananaya, action with a selfish motive, is far inferior to that performed with equanimity of mind. Seek refuge in this evenness of mind, for low are those who crave for fruit of action. 49. Comment. Action with a selfish motive is far inferior to that performed with equanimity of mind. Actions have a beginning and an end, and connection with their fruits is also temporary. We get associated and dissociated with them. But yoga, equanimity, is eternal. It never deserts us, it suffers no change. Therefore, selfish action is much inferior to equanimity. Action without equanimity mislead to pain, as well as to the cycle of birth and death, because they have no power to lead one to salvation. Equanimity is the ability to neutralize actions. If there is no equanimity, one will develop one's egoism and attachment to the body. This egoism and attachment are beastly. In the Bhagavata, sage Sukadeva says to King Pariksit, "Zero King, renounce this beastly nature which is causing fear of death in you." 12/5/2. Drina, as light is the contrary of darkness, an action performed with equanimity of mind is contrary to the action performed with a selfish motive. An action performed with equanimity leads to God realization, while motivated actions mislead to the wheel of birth and death. Seek refuge in this evenness of mind, viz., remain established in this evenness of mind, which will enable you to realize yourself. It is very lowly to crave for fruit of action. To accept one's affinity for actions, fruits of actions and bodies, etc., means to crave for fruit of action. Therefore, Lord Krishna, in the 47th verse, exhorts Arjuna not to have the fruit of action as his object. The eternal truth is different from perishable action and the fruit of action. What can be more ignoble than this, that the eternal should be subservient to the perishable fruit of action? Appendix. An action with a selfish motive is far inferior to yoga, equanimity, viz., it does not lead to salvation. As a molecule is far smaller than a mountain, viz., a molecule can't be compared with a mountain, Similarly, an action with a selfish motive is far inferior to yoga, viz. An action can't be compared with yoga. Yoga, equanimity, is skill in action. Yoga karmasu kausalam, Gita 250. Therefore without yoga, an action is of a very low order, is worthless and is an obstacle. Karmana badyajantu. In karmaga, karma is karanasapaksa, dependent on external and internal organs, but yoga is karana nirupaksa, independent of external and internal organs. Yoga is not attained by actions but is attained by service and renunciation. Therefore karmaga is not karma, action. Karmaga is karana nirupaksa, viz. Discrimination predominating discipline. If there is no predominance of service and renunciation, it will be karma, not karmaga, discipline of action, at all. Equanimity leads to God realization, but actions done with an interested motive lead to middle. The cycle of birth and death. Therefore a striver should depend on equanimity, should remain established in equanimity. By being established in equanimity, he will not remain destitute and nothing will remain to be done, to be known and to be attained by him. But he, who works with an interested motive, for him, ever remains destitute and bound. In Thila, three terms have been used for karmaga buddhi, yoga and buddhyaga. In karmaga, there is no predominance of action, karma, but there is predominance of yoga. Yoga, buddhi and buddhyaga, the three are synonyms. In karmaga, because of the predominance of determinate intellect, it is called buddhi, and because of the predominance of renunciation by discrimination, it is called yoga or buddhyaga. In dhyanaga, discipline of meditation, there is predominance of concentration of mind, while in karmaga there is predominance of intellect. While trying to control the mind, serenity and fickleness linger for a long time because in it a striver wants to withdraw the mind from the world and wants to concentrate it on God. While withdrawing the mind from the world, in its conception the existence of the world persists. This is a rule that so long as there is assumption of any other entity except God, the mind can't be fully controlled. Therefore up to the stage of trance also there are two states, trance and deviation from trance, relapse. But in karmaga, because of the predominance of intellect, there is prominence of discrimination. While applying discrimination, both the real and the unreal remain. A karmagi applies the unreal things for the service of others by regarding those things as the material for the service. By such conception the attachment for the unreal is quickly and easily renounced. The mind is not continuously concentrated, but it is concentrated at times and in loneliness. But determinate intellect, viz. A single-pointed determination of the intellect, always remains steadfast. Link in the next verse, Lord Krishna explains the result of endowed with equanimity. One frees the self in this life from good, virtue, and evil, vice, alike. Therefore, devote yourself to this yoga of equanimity. Skill in action lies in the practice of this yoga. 50. Comment. A person, endowed with equanimity, becomes free from virtue and vice like omnipresent God. Gita 2:38. In the state of equanimity, a man while living in the world detaches himself from the world, and remains untouched by virtues and sins, as a lotus leaf by water. Man himself is sentient and is free from virtue and sin, but by identifying himself with the unreal body etc., sins and virtues accrue. If he does not identify himself with the unreal, he will remain untouched by virtues and sins, and unconnected with them like the sky. Therefore, devote yourself to the yoga of equanimity, viz., remain established continuously in equanimity. You cannot attain that equanimity so long as you have attachment and aversion. You are the knower of pleasure and pain. It means that you are different from them and you are as an onlooker, who remains equanimous. So realize that equanimity. Yoga karmasu kausalam. Skill in action lies in the practice of this yoga. Equanimity, in success and failure, is skill in action. In this verse, Lord Krishna has not defined yoga, but he has explained the importance of yoga. Equanimity. If we interpret it as skill in action is yoga, it means that the action of a thief carried out skillfully will also be called yoga. Therefore, this interpretation does not seem proper. Some people may define yoga skill in action approved by the scriptures, but by doing so the people will be bound by the fruits of action and will not be able to attain equanimity. Therefore, it is proper to interpret equanimity in action as skill or wisdom. The reason is that he who remains even-minded while performing actions is not bound by such actions and their fruit. Secondly, in the first part of this verse, as well as in the previous two verses there is the reference of yoga, equanimity, rather than skill. So this interpretation seems to be reasonable. Appendix: if we reflect upon the expression yoga karmasu kausalam, it may have two meanings. I. Karmasu kausalam yoga, skill in actions is yoga. 2. Karmasu yoga kausalam, in action yoga is skill. If we interpret it in the first way, that skill in actions is yoga, then the actions of a thief or a swindler carried out very skillfully will be called yoga. This interpretation is not proper, and moreover here is not the topic of forbidden actions. If we regard only virtuous actions to be carried out skillfully as yoga, then the man will be bound, being attached to the fruit of those virtuous actions. Fail sakno nibadyat, Gita 5:12. Therefore he will not attain equanimity and his sufferings will not perish. In the scriptures it is mentioned karmana badyajant, viz. A man is bound by actions. Therefore the actions which naturally lead him to bondage may lead him to salvation. This is indeed skill in actions. Salvation is attained by yoga, equanimity, rather than by skill in actions. Yoga, equanimity, has neither its beginning nor end. But even the most virtuous actions begin and end, and there is union and disunion of their fruit also. How will a person attain salvation? By what begins and ends, and of which there is union and disunion. How will the imperishable be attained? By the perishable. Equanimity is the form of God. Nerdosarhai Samar Brahma, Gita 5:19. Therefore yoga is important, not actions. If the first interpretation is regarded as correct, even then within skill, equanimity or feeling of disinterest will have to be accepted. If skill in actions is yoga, then what is skill? While answering this question we'll have to say that only yoga, equanimity, is skill. In such a situation why should we not accept the direct meaning that yoga, equanimity, in actions is skill? When in the expression yoga karmasu kausalam the term yoga has certainly been used, then there is no need of interpreting the word kusalata, skill, as yoga. If we reflect upon this topic, there is the reference of yoga, equanimity, rather than skill in actions. The Lord, by declaring samadvam yoga usate, has also defined yoga. Therefore in this reference yoga is vihya, predicate, skill in actions is not predicate. Yoga, equanimity, is skill in action, viz. While doing actions there should be even-mindedness. There should not be any attachment or aversion. This is skill in actions. Therefore yoga karmasu kausalam, this is not the definition of yoga, but it is the glory of yoga. In the first half of this verse, 50th, the Lord has declared that a person endowed with equanimity becomes free from virtue and vice, sin. If he is freed from virtue and sin, then which action will be done with skill? Therefore freedom from virtue and sin does not mean that he does not do any action, because no one under any circumstances can remain even for a moment without undertaking action. Gita 3:5. So here freedom from virtue and sin means freedom from their fruit. In the 51st verse also the Lord has mentioned the renunciation of the fruit of action by the expression phalantai activa. In the Gita the term kusala has also been used in the 10th verse of the 18th chapter. There within a kusala karma all the actions performed with an interested motive and actions forbidden by the scriptures have been included, while within kusala karma all the actions done with disinterested motive and actions sanctioned by the scriptures have been included. There is a beginning and there is an end of a kusala and kuala actions, but there is no beginning or end of yoga. Attachment and aversion bind a man. Agreeable and disagreeable actions don't bind him. Therefore the actions, which are performed by being attached to them, may be very virtuous, will lead to bondage, because by those actions even if the abode of Brahma is attained, one has to return. Gita 8:16. Therefore the man, who does not shun the disagreeable actions with aversion and does not perform the virtuous actions with attachment, is indeed a man of true renunciation, is intelligent, is free from doubts and is established in the self. Gita 18:10. The above description proves that the expression yoga karmasu kausalam means yoga, equanimity, in actions is skill. This should not be accepted. The Lord also orders to perform actions being steadfast in yogasi yogastakuru karmani, Gita 2:48. It means that actions are not significant but yoga, equanimity, is significant. Therefore only yoga, equanimity, in actions is skill. Link. The Lord now gives examples to substantiate what has been said in the preceding verse. As wise men endowed with equanimity, renounce the fruits of actions, they also freed from the shackles of births and attain the blissful supreme state. 51 Comment: those endowed with equanimity are really wise. In the 10th verse of the 18th chapter also, it is explained that the man who does not hate disagreeable action nor is attached to an agreeable one, is wise. An action even without the desire for its fruit will bring about fruit. No one can dispense with its fruit. Suppose a farmer sows seed without a selfish motive, will he not get calm? He will definitely get calm. In the same way, if a person works in a detached spirit, he will get its fruit. Therefore, renunciation of fruit means renunciation of manifest and latent desires for fruit and attachment for fruit. All people are free and capable of renouncing such desires. The wise aspirants, endowed with equanimity of mind, are freed from the wheel of birth and death. As in the state of equanimity, they do not in the least possess evils, such as attachment and aversion etc., which are the root cause of rebirth. Thus they become free from the shackles of birth and death forever. Amaya means ailment. An ailment is a blemish. A thing which is free from all sorts of blemishes is called anamaya, spotless. Wise people endowed with equanimity attain the state which is free from any kind of blemish. This state has been called eternal state, in the 5th verse of the 15th chapter, and everlasting imperishable state, in the 56th verse of the 18th chapter. Though in the Gita, in 14.6, sattva quality, the mode of goodness, has also been called flawless, yet in fact, the self or God is flawless because by attaining him one has not to follow the wheel of birth and death. Lord Krishna has called sattva quality also flawless, because that also helps a man in attaining God realization. Self, soul, is immutable while the evolutes of matter, nature, body and the world are mutable. When this self, soul, identifies itself with the mutable body, it itself assumes taint with mutable nature. But, when it renounces this assumed identification, it realizes its pure self. This is a blissful supreme state, free from evil. In this verse the terms Buddha Ukta and Manizana have been used in the plural, to express the idea that all those who get established in equanimity undoubtedly attain the blissful supreme state, without any exception. It proves that when a striver has no affinity to the perishable body and the world, he attains that state automatically. No effort is required for such a state to be created, as it always is there. Appendix Y Yoga, equanimity, in actions is skill. The Lord explains its reason in this verse by the term high, reason. The fruit of sattvika, good, actions is pure, the fruit of rajasa action is pain, and the fruit of tamasa action is ignorance. Gita 14:16. A man with equanimity transcends these three kinds of fruit. The renunciation of the fruit of actions has two meanings: renouncing the desire for fruit and not to feel happy and sad in favorable and unfavorable circumstances which are the fruits of actions. In fact, the entire world which is born and perishes is nothing but the fruit of actions. If the fruit of actions is renounced, no bondage remains. The term manize means wise men. According to the preceding verse, performance of actions with equanimity is wisdom. Gita 4:18. The term gakanti has three meanings: l. to have knowledge, 2. to go, 3. to attain. Here attainment of the blissful supreme state means to have knowledge of being free from the shackles of birth and death, and of the attainment of the natural state, free from all sorts of blemishes. The reason is that only that is renounced which is in fact ever renounced, and only that is attained who is in fact ever attained. This verse proves that karmaga, discipline of action, is an independent means for salvation or benediction. By karmaga the renunciation of the world and attainment of God both ensue. Link in the next two verses, Lord Krishna explains the steps to attain the blissful supreme state, which is free from blemish. When your intellect crosses the mire of delusion, you will then acquire indifference to what has been heard and what is yet to be heard, about enjoyments of this world and the next. 52 Comment: the state which favors egoism in this body and attachment for the body, family, kinsmen and objects, is called delusion. Actually, there is no egoism and attachment for the body etc. They are merely assumed. Pleasure and displeasure, in favorable and unfavorable circumstances and evils, such as partiality, hatred, envy and jealousy etc., are a quagmire. When the intellect of a man gets entangled in this mire of delusion, he is perplexed and cannot think properly. He, himself is sentient, but by accepting his affinity for the insentient body and things etc., he identifies himself with them. Thus by closing his eyes to the real goal, he gets engrossed in worldly pleasure and prosperity. This is called entanglement in the mire of delusion. But the intellect which takes the firm decision to be free from the worldly pleasures and prosperity and to attain salvation, is called the intellect transcending the mire of delusion. There are two means to cross the swamp of delusion: discrimination, 2111-30, and selfless service. Acute discrimination between the real and the unreal makes one indifferent of the unreal world, and a keen desire for selfless service for the welfare of others enables one to renounce the desire for one's own pleasures. In the same way as when the disciple for his preceptor, a son for parents, a servant for his master develop a wish for providing all sorts of comforts to them, then their desire for comfort goes away automatically. The discipline of knowledge is somewhat difficult to practice, because the desire for pleasure may linger on in it. When a striver comes across pleasures, he deviates from his spiritual path and inclines towards them. But a striver who has the feeling for service to others, utilizes the material for the service of others, and thus his desire for pleasures perishes easily. Therefore, Lord Krishna has mentioned the discipline of disinterested action as superior to and easier than the discipline of knowledge. 5-3, and by it a striver quickly reaches Brahma the Absolute. 5-6. The pleasure which men have enjoyed and heard of, and also the pleasures of heaven etc., which are yet to be heard of, are transient. So, how can they give peace and joy to the man's self which is permanent? Thus men become dispassionate. When intellect gets out of the mire of delusion, then acute discrimination is developed that the world is ephemeral while he, the self, is eternal, and therefore, how could the kaleidoscopic world provide peace to him? With this attitude of mind, he automatically develops detachment from the whole world. Lord Krishna has used the term here instead of enjoy because there is attraction for pleasure after hearing about it. Thus hearing is an important factor for the attraction of pleasures. Hearing as a means occupies an important place in the disciplines of knowledge and devotion for spiritual progress also. The terms yada, when, and tada, then, have been used to emphasize the fact that there is no rule that it will take so many years or months or days to develop this acute dispassion. As soon as your intellect crosses the mire of delusion, you will become dispassionate. It involves no much delay. After your intellect, confused by hearing conflicting doctrines, has become stable and firm, steady, on God, you will then attain self-realization or union with God. 53. Comment: after crossing the mire of delusion also, there may be confusion of mind by hearing conflicting spiritual doctrines. So Lord Krishna induces Arjuna to get rid of that confusion. Srudaval pratapanate yadastasya niskulasa madhyavikula buddhastata yogamavapsiyasi. Arjuna was in a fix, whether he should perform his duty as a kshatriya or he should avoid the slaughter of his kith and kin. If he protected his family, he would shirk his duty. If he performed his duty of fighting, then the family would not be protected. So he was bewildered. Therefore Lord Krishna persuades Arjuna to keep the intellect firm in case of scriptural opinions and steady in regarding God realization. First of all, a striver is unable to make up his mind whether to have honest and sincere dealings with the worldly people, or to attain God. Then he decides that he has to render selfless service to the world. Having taken this decision, he starts showing indifference and dispassion to the worldly pleasures. Then in the spiritual path he comes across different opinions of the scriptures. So it becomes difficult for him to decide which opinion he should follow. In that case, by good company or faith etc., he is either able to take the decision or he surrenders himself to God. Then by God's grace his intellect becomes firm. Secondly, in all the scriptures and religions, God, soul and the world have been described in different forms and ways. But all of them agree, I am soul, not body. The world is to be ignored. God is to a person may be in a dilemma in two ways: in worldly affairs and in scriptural ordinances or sects such as dualism and non-dualism etc. It is more difficult to be free from the dilemma of the scriptural ordinances than from that of the worldly affairs. So Lord Krishna explains that a striver should have a determinate intellect, that he has to realize only God whatsoever may happen, be realized. By taking this decision the intellect of the striver becomes steady. Then he realized God easily. So the only obstacle to God realization is lack of firmness of intellect. The greater the deficiency in reaching at a decision regarding the contrary spiritual doctrines and in his own emancipation, the greater the delay there is. But in both cases, as soon as the intellect becomes steady and determinate, eternal union with God is realized. The intellect should be unshakable in order to renounce affinity for the world, as mentioned by the expression state of severance from union with pain, in the 23rd verse of the 6th chapter, while it should be steady in order to have affinity for God is expressed by the expression evenness of mind is called yoga, in the 48th verse of the 2nd chapter. Herein Tata Yogam of Apsyasa Yoga, means to become established in union with God, from whom there is no disunion. Only the striver has to abandon his affinity with the unreal. This union can be realized either by selfless service, viz., discipline of disinterested action, or discrimination, viz., discipline of knowledge, or love for God, viz., discipline of devotion, or meditation, or annihilation of the world, viz., discipline of annihilation, laga, or by the process of restraining breath, viz., discipline of austerity, hathaga, etc. Appendix. There are two divisions of delusion: mohikala, viz., the worldly delusion, and sruta vipratipati, scriptural, philosophical, delusion. Attachment to the body, wife, sons, wealth, property, etc., is worldly delusion, and Veda, dualism, Advaita, non-dualism, Visistadvaita, qualified dualism, and Advaita, dualism, non-dualism. To get entangled in these isms is scriptural delusion. By renouncing these two types of delusion, a man gets detached from pleasures and his intellect becomes stable. When the intellect becomes stable, yoga is attained, viz., the distance from God comes to an end and you come near to God. By karmaga you come near God, by jnanaga difference is wiped out, there is Buddha, and by bhaktiyoga there is a Buddha, viz., the devotee becomes God's own self. By attaining perfection in either karmaga or jnanaga, a striver gets the fruit of both. Gita 5:4-5. If a person has the only aim of salvation and has no selfish motive by having affinity for wealth, property, and family, relatives, etc., then he crosses the worldly delusion. If he does not want to gain bookish knowledge, rote learning, by studying the scriptures, but has the only aim to realize the self, he crosses the scriptural delusion. It means that a striver should neither be enamored by the worldly delusion nor by the scriptural, philosophical, differences of opinions, viz., he should not insist on any sect and or religion. Thus he becomes eligible for yoga, salvation, or devotion. Besides this, there is no need of any special eligibility, qualification. Arjuna then puts the question about the illumined one whose intellect has crossed the mire of delusion and who has become steadfast and firm on God. Arjuna said, O Kesava, what is the mark of a person of steadfast wisdom, who realizes, stitaprajya, God? How does such a man of firm wisdom speak, sit, and how does he walk? 54. Comment. Here Arjuna asks about the marks of a man of steadfast wisdom. Before he puts this question he had some doubt about the superiority of intellect or actions. 247-50. Lord Krishna, in 52nd and 53rd verses said, after crossing the mire of delusion, when your intellect has become steadfast and firm on God, you will attain self-realization or union with God. Hearing this, Arjuna wants to know the mark of one who attains self-realization, viz., who becomes a man of steadfast wisdom. He had doubt about action and knowledge, which he will ask further, in 311-2. Had Arjuna put a question regarding his doubts about action and knowledge, in the 54th verse here, then his question regarding the mark of the man of steadfast wisdom would have been much delayed. Samadhisthasya. Here, this term has been used for the person who has attained God realization. Stitaprajnapasya. This term has been used both for the enlightened, God-realized, soul, as well as the striver. The striver who is of a firm resolve and who never budges from his spiritual path, is also called a man of steadfast wisdom. The realized soul whose intellect is already steadfast, is also a man of steadfast wisdom. Now, the question arises, while Arjuna put the question about the enlightened soul only, why Lord Krishna included the striver too? The answer is that, in the discipline of knowledge, aspirants generally develop disinclination for activities. The perfect soul gets total disinclination. An aspirant of the discipline of devotion has an inclination to the recitation of divine name, meditation, association with holy men, and study of the scriptures, etc. These activities pervade in abundance in him. In the perfect state, only here the word samadhi has been used for God, as it was also used in the 44th verse of this chapter. activities pertaining to God are performed. Thus there is a clear difference in the degree of activities, of aspirants and realized souls in both the disciplines of knowledge and devotion. But in the discipline of action, the flow of activities goes on as usual, without any change, in both the stages as a striver and a perfected soul. So, there is a description of strivers, from the 41st verse to the 45th verse, and also from the 47th verse to the 53rd verse. Thus, in the context, the means by which strivers can be perfect souls have been enunciated, and the marks of the perfect soul have also been described. What is the description or mark of an enlightened soul? Lord Krishna answers this question in the next verse. How does the enlightened soul speak? Lord Krishna will answer this question in 56th and 57th verses. How does he sit, viz., how does he become dispassionate? Lord Krishna has answered these in verses from 58th to 63rd. Vrajata Kim, how does he walk, viz., how does he behave? Lord Krishna has answered this question in the verses 64th to 71st. Link. Lord Krishna, in the next verse, answers Arjuna's first question. The blessed Lord said, O Partha, Arjuna, when a man discards all his desires visiting the mind, and is self-satisfied in own self, he is said to be stable in wisdom. Comment. According to the Gospel of the Gita, a striver can attain perfection, God realization, by any discipline, that of disinterested action or devotion etc., which he follows according to his interest and liking, and his perfection is described by that means only. Example: a striver following the discipline of devotion worships God constantly, meditating on him with exclusive devotion. 12.6. Therefore, in the enlightened state, he becomes free from malice towards all beings. 12.13. In the discipline of knowledge the striver perceives himself detached from these gunas, attributes, modes, and is above them. 14.19. And in the enlightened state, he sits like a witness firmly established in God, beyond all the gunas, having risen above them. 14.22-25. Similarly, in karmaga it is the abandoning of all desires that is important. Hence the enlightened soul abandons all desires. In this verse Lord Krishna dwells upon this point. Brajahati yada common sarvan parthamanigat, and it means that desire does not exist in the self, because the self is everlasting while desire is transient. Moreover, it does not stay permanently in the mind but comes into it managated. But the man, by identifying himself with body, senses, mind and intellect, accepts the desire visiting the mind as resting in his own self. Jahati, use of the prefix pro before the verb jahati, indicates that there is no trace of any desire left in him. A man can neither renounce his own self nor the things which are not his own, but he can renounce only the things which actually are not his own, but he has mistaken them as his own. Similarly, desires do not exist in one's own self, but one accepts them as existing in one's own self, so he has to cast them off. The term kaman, desires, also includes the term sarvan, all, yet sarvan has been added to emphasize the fact that every fragment of all the desires should be cast off. After abandoning all the desire completely, a man is satisfied in himself and with himself, i.e., he is spontaneously contented in his own self. Contentment is of two kinds. One is said to be a virtue as it relates to inner sense. It is a result of no desire in the inner sense. But the other kind is the self itself. As the self never has any trace of discontentment, so it is called contentment incarnate, the self itself. The latter contentment is eternal. It knows no change. It is spontaneous. It is not the result of any practice or thought. The intellect of such a contented man always remains steadfast automatically. Actually, a man is always steady in wisdom, but when he accepts his desires, because of unsteady mind, he does not realize his stableness and wisdom. When he abandons his desires, viz., accepts the non-existence of desires, he realizes his stability and wisdom. A striver has to make effort to concentrate his mind, but by renouncing desires he does not have to do so. Instead he attains this stage, in a spontaneous manner. In the discipline of action, the striver is concerned with actions more than anything else. Action without selfish motive is said to be the means for a sage to attain yoga. Gita 6/3. Therefore such a striver is concerned with actions relating to the stage when he is a striver, as well as when he is an enlightened soul. Whatever standard an enlightened soul sets, people in general follow the same, Gita 3:21. The Lord has explained, in the 4th chapter also, that the striver following the discipline of disinterested action while performing actions remains detached, and while remaining detached he performs actions. 4:18. In the 53rd verse Lord Krishna had advised two things to Arjuna: to keep his intellect immovable regarding scriptural doctrine and steady in God. So he has used the term yada, when, and tada, then, which explain that a striver is called stable in wisdom when he is completely free from desires, and is satisfied in the self. It also means that he is called a striver so long as he has even a fragment of desire left, and an enlightened soul when desires are totally renounced. Therefore, two important factors have been explained in the verse to renounce the desire and to get established in God. The same two factors have been explained in verses 56, 57, 58, 59, 60 and 61, 62 to 65, 66 to 68, 69, 70 and 71 and 72. Appendix 1. Division is of those who are of unsteady intellect, while the other division is of those of steady intellect. The Lord has described the men of unsteady intellect from the 41st verse to the 44th verse. Now he describes the men of steady wisdom from the 55th verse to the 71st verse. When the striver, having renounced the worldly inclination, is established in the self, he is said to be stable in wisdom. He, who has the aim of God realization, has a determinate and single-pointed intellect, because God is also only one. But he who has the worldly aim, his intellect is full of numberless desires, because worldly objects are numberless. Gita 2:41. In order to attain equanimity, steadiness of intellect is very necessary. In Patafijala Yoga Darsana, importance has been attached to stability of mind, concentration of the mind. But the Gita attaches importance to the stability of intellect, steadfastness of aim. The reason is that in God realization the steadiness of the mind is not so important as is the steadiness of intellect. By the steadiness of mind worldly siddhis, accomplishments or occult powers, are gained, but by the steadiness of intellect, spiritual perfection, salvation, is attained. In karmaga, steadiness of intellect is important. If the mind becomes concentrated, how will a karanagi discharge his duty? The reason is that when the mind becomes steady, the outward activities stop. The Lord also orders Arjuna to discharge his duties being steadfast in yoga, equanimity, yogastakaru karmani, Gita 2:48. The Lord, by using the terms prajahadya and common sarvan, means that there shouldn't be even a trace of desire, but it should be renounced totally. The reason is that this desire is the main stumbling block to God realization. Link. The next two verses deal with the manner in which a realized soul speaks. He, whose mind remains unperturbed in sorrow, who does not crave for pleasure, and who is free from passion, fear and anger, is called a sage with stable wisdom. 56. Comment. Arjuna puts a question, attaching importance to action, while Lord Krishna answers, attaching importance to feelings, because a change in feeling brings about a corresponding change in action. The Lord is discussing here the feeling or the motive which changes the character of action throughout. Outwardly, it may seem quite different. Whenever in the Gita Arjuna puts a question attaching importance to action, Lord Krishna answers it attaching importance to feelings and understanding, because an action is performed according to the feelings and understanding. For example, Arjuna in the 14th chapter asked, "What are the marks of him who has transcended the three modes?" Lord Krishna, attaching importance to feelings, replies, "He remains even-minded. There is no end to sorrow, calumny, dishonor and unfavorable circumstances in this world. But a man of wisdom remains unperturbed, because the aim of his life is to discharge his duty to the best of his ability and capacity, for the welfare to others, without having any desire for its fruit. So, he always remains happy and unperturbed even in the most unfavorable circumstances. He does not crave for any kind of pleasure such as praise, honor and favorable circumstances, etc., nor does he have a desire to prolong such a state. He remains unruffled in the midst of favorable or hostile circumstances. Our entanglement with worldly things is known as attachment, raga. If a stronger person tries to deprive us of worldly possessions, it arouses fear in us, whereas if a weaker person does so, it arouses anger in us. But a person who is keen to do good to others automatically gets rid of attachment. This freedom from attachment leads him to fearlessness and calmness. Thus he becomes free from attachment, fear and anger. So long as there are perturbations, cravings, attachment, fear and anger. Even in a small measure, a man is called a striver. But when he is totally free from them, he becomes an enlightened soul. Lust, desire, craving and greed etc. are forms of attachment. In attachment there is an attraction for the perishable worldly objects. The mind of such a follower of the discipline of selfless action becomes stable. Here, the term muni has not been used for a person who keeps silent. The Lord has also not used the term mana for penance of speech, but he has used it for mental penance, Gita 17/16. So here, muni has been used for a contemplative person, free from desire and attachment. He contemplates to remain unattached, like an enlightened soul. Throughout his practice he is very cautious to remain unattached. Such cautiousness automatically persists in an enlightened soul. That awareness leads him to attainment of beatitude, Gita 3:19. It is because of this virtue of awareness that he has been described by the term muni. He who remains unattached under all conditions, he who is neither delighted at good, nor dejected with evil, is stable in wisdom. 57 Comment in the previous verse, Lord Krishna explained that a man of stable wisdom remains unperturbed, while discharging his duty. In this verse, he explains that such a man remains stable in favorable and unfavorable circumstances, which he comes across as a result of the deeds he performs. He remains unattached everywhere, viz., he is not attached to his body, senses, mind, intellect, family and possessions. He never identifies himself with them, but always remains untainted by them. Despite his physical association with senses, objects, circumstances and individuals etc., he remains quite unattached with them. Through the self, he remains untainted and unaffected by good and bad, favorable and unfavorable circumstances. Experiencing good or pleasant, he is not delighted. This delight means mental joy and expression of joy through words. By encountering evil or unpleasant, he is not dejected. This dejection means mental suffering and despair, and the thought why and how this situation has occurred, and how to get rid of the unpleasant situation. He remains untainted in favorable and unfavorable circumstances, which we got as a result of destiny. The expression, tat, signifies that meeting with all agreeable and disagreeable persons, incidents, objects and circumstances that can possibly cause mental perturbations, he neither rejoices in them nor hates them. Whenever, wherever, and however, he may meet with them. Tasi prajiya pradithita. His determinate intellect now becomes stable in God. He understands that he is entirely unconcerned with the good and evil of the world, because these always change, while he, soul, always remains the same. There is no modification in the self, while in the evolutes of matter, there is always modification. Man identifies himself with the body and regards the modification of the body as modification in his own self. But when he realizes the two as separate, his intellect becomes stable. The second interpretation is that limitless and endless God cannot be perceived by the intellect, which is limited. So the intellect merges in God and then there remains nothing besides God. This is fixation of intellect in God or stability in wisdom. A karmagi is ever active. Therefore, the Lord, in the 56th verse, mentions that he neither craves for success, pleasure, nor is he perturbed in failure, sorrow, while in this verse he declares that he neither delighted at receiving the agreeable nor dejected at the disagreeable. Link now. Lord Krishna answers the third question, how does an equanimous person sit? When, like a tortoise, withdrawing its limbs from all sides, he detaches completely his senses from sense objects, his wisdom is stable. 58 Comment here, the purpose of the illustration of the tortoise is, that as a tortoise withdraws its 6 limbs, 4 legs, a tail and a head into the shell to protect itself against possible dangers, so does an enlightened one also withdraw his 5 senses and 1 mind from sense objects. If he has the least affinity with senses, he cannot be middle. A man of stable wisdom. Here the verb samrit has been used to emphasize the fact that he does not even think of worldly pleasures. In this verse the term yada has been used but tada is not used. The reason is that when the senses are withdrawn from their sense objects, the self which is axiomatic, is realized, because that is beyond the limit of time. So the word tada, which denotes time, has not been applied. Self-realization or God realization is axiomatic, and is beyond the reach of senses. but we are veiled by the curtain of pleasures and thus cannot realize him. He still exists. But as soon as that veil is removed, viz., we renounce our affinity to the worldly pleasures, and he is revealed. Lord Krishna explains in the next verse, that mere withdrawal of the senses from sense objects, is not the mark of a man of steadfast wisdom. Sense objects cease to exist for him, who does not enjoy them with his senses, but the taste for them may persist. This relish also disappears from a man of stable mind, when he realizes the Supreme. 59 Comment: a man becomes an abstainer in two ways, I. Fasting by one's own will or owing to sickness. 2. Abstaining from the sense enjoyments. Here, the term has been used to refer to a striver who withdraws his senses from sense objects. The senses of a sick man become unfit for indulgence, but craving in them for sense enjoyment persists. He hopes to enjoy these after recovery. Similarly, sense objects cease for the abstinent striver, but the taste persists. It means that his body and senses come under restraint, but his mind wanders. The dispassionate strivers who have instinctively no attachment for pleasure, become free from this taste. The striver who wants to follow the spiritual path but is not dispassionate, can restrain his body and senses by thinking of the adverse consequences of sense enjoyments, though his taste persists. Rasapyasiparamditavonyavartate: the relish of the man of steadfast wisdom, who realizes the Supreme, disappears. It is a rule. But the contrary, that with the disappearance, cessation, of relish, a striver attains steadfast wisdom, is not true. Rasapyasu means that a striver has feeling in his egoism, viz., I-ness. This taste changes itself into attachment. Therefore, a striver should have determination that he as a striver has no attachment, no desire. This sort of determination, aim, frees him from relish, and after realizing God this relish disappears altogether. Appendix: by accepting the existence and attaching value to pleasures, in the mind there ensues a subtle attraction, lovability and sweetness for pleasures. It is named rasa, relish. As a greedy man rejoices at heart by receiving money, and a voluptuary is rejoiced at heart by coming in contact with a woman, it is called rasa. After enjoying pleasure, a man declares, "Oh, how much I relished this!" is recollection of that rasa, relish. This relish abides in the assumed ego-ness, sijjata granthi. The gross form of this relish is attachment to pleasures. So long as a man has relish for sense enjoyments, he has to depend on prakriti, matter, and its evutes, actions, objects and persons. When he is free from this relish, his dependence totally perishes. His dependence on sense enjoyments stops and he is no longer a slave to them. So long as a person accepts the existence of pleasures, attaches importance to them and has relish for them, the spiritual, unworldly, relish for God is not revealed. Not to speak of unworldly relish, he can't have the determinate intellect to attain him. Gita 2:44. After merely withdrawing outwardly the senses from sense objects, the relish, taste, persists. By attaining self-realization this taste disappears, this relish disappears. Parandoktartvonivartate. It means that when a striver realizes that he is different from the world and realizes his identity with God, then the perishable taste disappears. With the disappearance, cessation, of the perishable taste, imperishable, non-stop relish is aroused. After self-realization this relish for pleasure certainly disappears, but even before self-realization, by being indifferent to it, by reflection, by good company and by the grace of saints, a striver can be free from this relish. The company of the enlightened exalted souls can also free a striver from this taste, relish. The three disciplines karmaga, jnanaga and bhaktiyoga can free a striver from the perishable relish. When a striver starts relishing the taste of service in kanaga, the taste of self-realization in jnanaga and the taste of devotion, love, in bhaktiyoga, his relish for the perishable pleasures starts disappearing. As a child in childhood relishes toys, but when he grows up, he starts relishing wealth, then his relish for toys naturally disappears. Similarly, when a striver relishes the spiritual discipline, the relish for mundane pleasures naturally disappears. When relish persists and pleasures are enjoyed, then a man's heart melts and he is overpowered by pleasures. But when he is freed from relish, he may come across worldly pleasures, but they don't cause the least agitation in his mind. Gita 2:70. He has no such inclination that pleasure may attract him. As you put a bag of money before an animal, It does not covet for it, and after seeing a beautiful woman it is not lustful. An animal doesn't know the value of money and a woman, but an enlightened exalted soul knows money as well the woman. Gita 269. Yet he is free from greed and lust. When we have an itching sensation in any organ of the body, we scratch it with our fingers, and when this sensation ends, it does not make any difference in fingers. There is no alteration in them. Similarly, an enlightened soul uses the sense objects, but his mind remains the same, unperturbed and free from agitation. The reason is that being free from relish, he has no inclination for enjoying middle pleasures. Whatever he does it for the welfare of others and to comfort them. Contemplation on the sense objects for one's own pleasure leads one to ruin or fall. Gita 260-263. But even the use of the sense objects not for one's own pleasure does not lead to bondage. Gita 264-65. The perishable relish, taste, is instantaneous, it does not last long. The relish which we have for a woman or money at the beginning does not persist in the same degree afterwards. We relish the food at the beginning, but after each morsel the relish decreases and finally ends, and then we have a dislike for that food. But the imperishable relish never lessens but always remains the same. Enjoyment of the perishable relish results in inertness, shortage, grief, diseases, fear, commotion and other evils. A voluptuous person can't escape these evils because pleasures certainly lead to these evils. Therefore the Lord has mentioned the perception of misery and evil in the Medakados and Udarsanam. Gita 13/8. The man freed from evils such as desire etc. pursues his salvation. Gita 16:21-22. Link. What is the harm if this relish does not cease, is explained in the next verse. The turbulent senses, Zero son of Kunti, forcibly sway the mind of even a wise man, who practices self-control. 60. Comment. The term, wise man boss been used, for the man who practices self-control, who performs his duty without attachment and desire for its fruit, one who discriminates between the real and the unreal and who thinks of the welfare of all creatures. The turbulent senses of even such a wise man carry away his mind towards pleasures. The reason is, that so long as mind is not permanently established in God, the past influences of enjoyment of pleasures attract the senses and mind towards pleasures, forcibly. Even, some sages could hear Lord Krishna has called the senses turbulent, and in the 34th verse of the 6th chapter Arjuna has called the mind turbulent. It means that both the senses and the mind are turbulent. Similarly here it is explained that senses carry away the mind, while in the 67th verse of this chapter it is explained that the mind carries away discrimination. It means that both senses and mind are impetuous, so a striver should control both of them, not control this temptation. Therefore, a striver should never trust his senses and should be always on his guard. Moreover, he should never feel proud of sense control. Link. In the next verse, Lord Kr1 Jo explains how to control the turbulent senses, which forcibly carry away the mind of even a wise man, in whom the taste for sense objects still persists. Having controlled all the senses, a striver should engage in meditation, devoting himself heart and soul to me. His wisdom, mind, is stable, constant, whose senses are under control. 61. Comment. By controlling the senses, a striver should devote himself, heart and soul to me. Moreover, he should not feel proud of his sense control, because pride goes before a fall. He should, rather, feel that it was only God's grace, which enabled him to control his senses. Generally, in a striver following the discipline of action, there is predominance of action. Therefore, he develops egoism. Due to this egoistic feeling, he pays little attention to the divine grace, though the endowment of human body, inclination, practice and success of this discipline, are all the result of divine grace. By his special divine grace, the Lord is exhorting the striver to be devoted to him. Thus, he should devote himself heart and soul to him, thinking that he is God's and God is his, while he is a man should not live in loneliness with a woman even though she is his mother, sister or daughter, because the impetuous senses enslave even a wise man. Manu 2:215. Neither of the world nor is the world his. He should infuse a sense of I in only God, not in the world, at all. This section deals with the discipline of disinterested action. So, Lord Krishna should have told Arjuna some method of that discipline. But Lord Kri, a time and again has laid great emphasis on devotion to him, and has glorified it very much. So he declares among all yogis, he who worships me with faith, his innermost self merged in me, is considered by me to be the best yogi, most devout. Gita 6:47. In the 59th verse, Lord Krishna said that even with the cessation of sense objects, a striver does not become a man of steadfast wisdom. But here he says that the wisdom of the striver who has controlled his senses is stable. Why? The clarification is that, in 259, even at the cessation of the sense objects, the taste, relish, for sense enjoyments persists. But here in this verse, the senses of the striver are controlled and his taste has also disappeared. Thus the striver becomes stable in wisdom, mind, at the cessation of taste. Appendix: the Lord exhorts the striver following karmaga to devote himself heart and soul to him by using the term Maadpura. This is a special feature of devotion because without being devoted to him, total control over senses is difficult. In karmaga there is renunciation, and renunciation leads to peace and happiness. This happiness follows cessation of miseries. This is with the result of attaining something. A bhakti-yogi attains eternal bliss. Therefore without the bliss attained by devotion, love, senses are not totally controlled. Secondly, in karmaga only by intense dispassion, detachment, senses are controlled, but in devotion, being devoted to God, even by a little dispassion, senses are easily controlled. Therefore the Lord has used the term Maadpura. Link: when a striver devotes himself heart and soul to God, his senses are controlled and his relish, taste for sense enjoyments disappears. But what about those who do not devote themselves to God? The answer is provided in the next two verses. Contemplating constantly on the objects of senses, a man develops attachment for them. From attachment springs desire, and from desire, unfulfilled, originates anger. From anger arises delusion. From delusion, confusion of memory, from which grows loss of reason, and with loss of reason, discrimination. He goes to complete ruin. 62-63 Comment: when a man does not devote himself to God, viz., he does not meditate on God, he broods on objects of senses, because in the case there is nothing else to contemplate on, except the world. Thus, by brooding over them, he develops attachment for them. Due to this attachment he enjoys sense objects. This enjoyment may be mental or physical. The pleasure resulting from enjoyment enhances attachment. Due to this enhanced attachment, he repeatedly dwells on sense objects. It is a rule that the enhanced attachment persists, whether he enjoys the sense objects or not. By developing attachment for sense enjoyments, one has a desire to acquire and enjoy those sense objects. Gratification of desire misleads to greed, and one who creates an obstacle in the possibility of its gratification becomes a victim of anger. The desire for respect and honor on the ground of caste, stage of life and virtues etc. also causes anger, if some obstacles are put in its gratification. Desire is a rajasic trait, delusion a tamasika one, and anger lies between the two. If you are angry with either, it means that you have attachment for something or the other. If you are angry with a man who defames you, it means that you are attached to fame. If you are enraged with a person who censures you, it proves your pride of innocence, and so on. From anger ensues delusion. In fact, delusion ensues not only from anger, but also from desire, greed and attachment. Delusion born of desire, veils discrimination, and so a man goaded by desire performs undesirable actions. 2. Out of anger, a deluded person utters harsh and pinching words, to even friends and adorable ones, and performs wrong and cruel deeds. 3. Delusion born of greed makes a man blind, and he cannot distinguish between the real and the unreal, the right and the wrong, and he cheats others by using fraudulent methods. 4. Delusion born of attachment creates partiality. Now the question arises, why Lord Krishna has said that delusion ensues from anger while it ensues from desire, greed and attachment, as well. If we give a serious thought, we come to know that goaded by desire, greed and attachment, a man thinks of his own selfish motive and pleasure, while in anger he thinks of doing evil to others. Thus, delusion born middle of anger is more disastrous than that born of the other three. Therefore Lord Krishna has said that delusion ensues from anger. From delusion arises confusion of memory. It means that a man forgets his aim to attain salvation, or to follow the spiritual path, in accordance with the ordinance of the scriptures, etc. From confusion of memory arises loss of reason, viz., a man cannot discriminate between right and wrong. Loss of discrimination paves the way to self-destruction. Therefore, it is obligatory for all strivers to devote themselves heart and soul to God, in order to escape self-destruction. Brooding on the objects of senses leads to attachment, attachment leads to desire, desire to anger, anger to delusion, delusion to loss of memory to loss of reason, and finally, loss of reason leads to utter ruin. Though it takes time to describe this order, yet the rise of these propensities leading to the destruction of man is as fast as death caused by an electric shock. Lord Krishna, in the next verse, answers the fourth question: how does a man of steadfast wisdom walk? But a self-controlled yogi in practice, or a striver, while using objects with thus uses, which are controlled and freed from attraction and aversion, he attains placidity of mind. With the attainment of such placidity, all his sorrows come to an end, and the intellect of such a person of tranquil mind soon becomes firmly established in God. 64-65 Comment 2. In the previous verse, Lord Krishna said that by contemplating on the objects of senses a man goes to complete ruin, while here he says that the striver, free from attachment while using the sense objects with the senses, becomes firmly established in God. So the Lord has used the term to, but, to differentiate between the two. To achieve his aim, it is very necessary for a striver, especially for a karanagi, to control his mind. Otherwise he may have attachment for pleasure and thus may go to ruin. As the term vihyatma has been used for controlling the mind, so the word atmavasya is used for sense control. In worldly dealings, senses should be kept under control, and for sense control they should be free from attachment and aversion. Therefore, Lord Krishna, in the 34th verse of the 3rd chapter, has warned strivers and said, attachment and aversion are rooted in all sense objects. A striver should not come under their sway, because they are verily his enemies. Similarly, he has said in the 3rd verse of the 5th chapter, the striver who is free from the pairs of opposites, such as attachment and aversion, etc., is easily set free from bondage. A striver who has controlled his mind and whose senses are controlled and free from attachment and aversion, uses the sense objects, but does not enjoy them, viz., he does not derive pleasure from them, and it is enjoyment, rather than use, which leads him to ruin. A striver who utilizes the sense objects being free from attachment and aversion attains placidity, purity, of mind. This placidity, serenity, of mind, is called mental austerity, Gita 17:16, which is superior to the austerity of body and austerity of speech. So a striver should neither enjoy the sense objects with attachment, nor should renounce them with aversion, because both attachment and aversion lead him to affinity for the world. Such a striver attains placidity of mind, and if that placidity of mind is not enjoyed, that leads to God realization. With the attainment of such placidity of mind, all his sorrows come to an end, because it is attachment only which causes sorrows. These sorrows give birth to desire, which again causes sorrow. When attachment goes away, the mind becomes serene, and its serenity destroys all sorrows. Actually, all the sorrows are born because of affinity for matter, and it sevutes the world and the body. A striver has affinity for the world, with the desire to enjoy pleasures. This desire is born of despair, or the feeling of something lacking in himself. When there is placidity of mind, despair disappears. When despair is lost, there is no desire for pleasures, and when there is no desire for pleasures, affinity for the world automatically breaks off, and then sorrows disappear. It means that placidity of the mind results in breaking off affinity for the world and establishment of the self in God. Here sarvadakanimhana does not mean that a striver will not come across unfavorable and sorrowful circumstances, but it means that those circumstances cannot create commotion and agitation in his mind. The intellect of such a person of tranquil mind soon becomes firmly established in God, viz., the striver himself becomes established in God, and his intellect has no doubts in the least. Something remarkable enhancement of either placidity or uneasiness for God enables a striver to realize God. The Gopis were locked up by their husbands, brothers and parents and prevented from meeting Lord Krishna. The uneasiness to meet the Lord destroyed their sins, and the placidity of mind by meditation on God destroyed their virtues. Thus, being free from sins and virtues, and leaving their bodies, They were the first to meet God. But in the worldly affairs, placidity and uneasiness of mind lead a man to bondage and strengthen the bondage, because his aim is to enjoy the worldly pleasures. The living examples are common worldly people who are entangled in the worldly snare, because of placidity and uneasiness, in mundane affairs. The inner self is overwhelmed in placidity and uneasiness. Just as the color which is added to liquid wax becomes a permanent part of it, in the same way, whatever thoughts are put into the overwhelmed inner self, these become a permanent part of it and lead the striver to salvation or to damnation. Therefore a striver should neither be pleased nor displeased, while gaining or losing the most charming objects of the world. Appendix: there are two divisions, one of bhoga, pleasures, and one of yoga. If a bhogi, voluptuary, having attachment and aversion, dwells upon the objects of senses, he goes to ruin, fall. Gita 260-63. But if a yogi freed from attachment and aversion utilizes sense objects, he does not go to ruin, rather he attains God. A person freed from likes and dislikes does not enjoy and relish pleasures because it is not his aim. He utilizes the sense objects without coming under the sway of attachment, having the sense of detachment. Gita 3:34. Therefore he attains placidity, purity, of renunciate. The use of sense objects with the sense of renunciation is indeed not bhoga. From the viewpoint of people it appears that he is using sense objects, therefore here the expression visayankaran has been used. By being free from attachment and aversion, placidity of mind is attained. There should be cheerfulness every time, there should not be any distress, there should not be monotony. This is prasada, placidity of mind. If a striver is not satiated with this placidity and he does not enjoy it, it will very quickly lead him to God realization. Link Lord KR1J.A clarifies the point of view expressed in the previous two verses by negative inference. He, who has not controlled his mind and senses, can have no determinate intellect, nor can such an undisciplined man have a sense of duty. A man without having a sense of duty can have no peace, and how can there be happiness for one lacking peace? 66. Comment: in the discipline of disinterested action, control over the mind and senses is important, because without control, desire persists, and with the persistence of desire, the mind does not get fixed. Therefore, it is obligatory for a striver following the discipline of action to control his mind and senses. What happens to the man who has not controlled his mind and senses is explained in this verse. Nasti buddhir yuktasya: he who has not controlled his mind and senses cannot have determinate intellect that he has without change of the sense of I, egotism. Senses are not controlled only to realize God, because he indulges in worldly pleasures and seeks prosperity. He develops desire for riches, honor and bodily comforts, etc. These numerous desires keep his intellect obsessed and do not allow him to have a stable intellect. Nasuktasya bhavani: he whose intellect is not determinate, cannot have the feeling that he has to discharge his duty by renouncing attachment and desire, etc., because he has not fixed the aim of his life. The man who does not discharge his duty efficiently and sincerely can have no peace, whosoever he may be. Asintasya kutasukam: how can he who lacks peace be happy? He cannot be middle-happy, because his heart is filled with agitation and commotion. Despite acquiring all agreeable sense objects, his mental perturbation cannot be wiped out. In other words, he cannot be happy. Link in the next verse, Lord Krishna explains why the intellect of a person who had not controlled his mind and senses cannot be determinate. Just as the wind sails a ship on water, the mind that yields to one of the wandering senses takes away the discrimination of man. 67. And without sense control there cannot be determinate intellect. But if a striver changes his egotism and accepts that he is a striver whose aim is nothing but God realization, his mind and senses are instinctively controlled. Comment: God has bestowed upon man a human body to attain him. So a man should firmly resolve to attain God realization. This resolve removes his attachment for pleasures and makes his intellect determinate. But what happens if the intellect does not become determinate, has been described here. Senses are involuntarily drawn to the sense objects. Mind that follows any one of the senses is naturally led astray by it. For example, while relishing a tasteful dish, the sense of taste gets attached to it, and then it attracts the mind, and thus the misdirected mind gets entangled in this taste. When the mind gets entangled in pleasures, man immediately loses his determinate intellect that he has to realize God only. A ship without a rudder is at the mercy of a strong wind. As a rudderless ship does not reach its destination, a misdirected mind takes away man's discrimination. A strong wind either pushes away the ship in the wrong direction or sinks it. But a skillful sailor manages the ship in such a way that the wind, instead of pushing it away from its course, helps it in sailing and reaching its destination. Similarly, the misdirected mind misguides discrimination. In two ways: it leads it astray from the path of God realization and engages it in sense pleasures, or it ruins him by entangling it in prohibited pleasures. But a controlled mind and senses do not take the intellect away ward, they rather help one in realizing God. 264-65. Appendix. Here a doubt may arise: why have the meanings of the terms yet and tat been taken mind rather than senses, viz., why has it been said that the mind rather than senses takes away reason? The clarification is that in the 60th verse of this chapter it has been said that senses sway the mind, and in the 42nd verse of the 3rd chapter it is mentioned that mind is superior to the senses and intellect is greater, subtle, higher and more powerful than the mind. It proves that senses sway the mind and the mind sways the intellect. Secondly, in swaying the intellect the mind is important, senses are not important. The reason is that unless the mind accompanies senses, senses don't know sense objects. Gita 15:9. In Srimad Bhagavad Dattatreyaji Maharaj declares, Srimad, November 9, 2013, he, whose mind is tied up in the soul, has no knowledge of anything outward or inward. I saw that an arrow maker was so much engrossed in arrow making that he did not notice the Ising's cavalcade in procession passing by him. The arrow maker had the sense of hearing and its sense object was sound also, but he could not hear because his mind was not diverted towards the procession. When without the mind, the senses can't even know their sense objects, then how can they sway the intellect? They can't. Link. In the next verse, Lord Krishna describes the condition of the striver, who has controlled his senses. Therefore, zero mighty armed, his intellect is stable, whose senses are completely controlled against sense objects. 68. Comment. Lord Krishna concludes the topic of the mind and the senses, by using the word tasmad, therefore, and says, that the intellect of a person whose mind and senses are completely free from the worldly attractions, is stable. By giving the term sarvasa, completely, he means to explain that his senses are not inclined towards pleasures, whether he lives in the world or in seclusion, and even if his mind and senses are directed to the sense objects, they do not lead his intellect astray. Nigrahatani, restrained, means that the senses have no attachment for the sense objects. As a snake, without teeth, has no poison, senses without attachment and aversion have no poison to degrade a man from a spiritual path. These become sublimated and lead a striver to divinity. This verse means that if a striver has determination that his aim is to realize God, rather than to enjoy worldly pleasures and prosperity, his intellect will become stable. Link. What is the difference between a striver whose senses are completely restrained from their objects, and an ordinary man? Here is the answer: that, which is night to all beings, in that state of divine knowledge and supreme bliss, an emancipated person keeps awake. And that, the ever-changing worldly happiness, in which all beings keep awake, is night, to the enlightened seer. 69. Comment. Those worldly people whose senses and mind are uncontrolled and who are immersed in pleasure are asleep in the dark, because they never think that the aim of human life is emancipation or salvation. Further, they never think what is God, what is self-realization. Why are we suffering? Why are there all these burning sensations? Where will our misdeeds take us? Turning away from these thoughts is complete darkness for the worldly people. Here the term beatanam has been used to explain the fact that human beings who hanker after pleasures and prosperity, and are immersed in them, are like other beings, such as birds and beasts, etc., because both have no inclination for God realization. If there is any difference between the two, it is that discrimination. Human beings is much more developed than beasts and birds, and therefore, by using discrimination, they can serve others and attain salvation or God realization, while birds and beasts cannot. On the other hand, if they misuse this discrimination in hankering after pleasures and prosperity, they can be more harmful to the society Then even wild beasts, animals and birds eat food, only to sustain their life. They never hoard. But human beings are given to hoarding, whatever they get. Therefore, they create obstacles to the utilization of those things by others. When the worldly people remain asleep in the dark, having no inclination for God realization, the seer who has controlled his senses and mind and who has no attachment for pleasures and prosperity and whose aim of life is only God realization, remains wakeful because his intuition, his concepts and precepts, are all filled with divinity. The worldly people who want to accumulate wealth, by means fair or foul, and who hanker after transient sensual pleasures, honor and praise etc., are wakeful of mundane affairs. The worldly people feel very happy and deem themselves very wise, in enjoying and hoarding worldly pleasures. These, a seer, in the state of divine knowledge and supreme bliss, perceives as dark. As children, while playing marbles attach great importance to small balls, of glass or clay, so people attach importance to worldly prosperity and pleasure, and for gaining these they employ all sorts of means, fair or foul. But a self-controlled seer knows that all mundane pleasures, prosperity and praise etc., are transient, illusory and changing, while God and his own self are eternal, real and permanent. He also knows how the best use of mundane objects can be made, and how far they can be utilized for the welfare of others. He uses them in the service of others. In spite of the manifest appearance of the world to the mind and senses, he has a firm conviction that the world is a mere illusion, and has no real existence at all. So wakefulness of the worldly people is just like a dark night for him. Appendix: the worldly people remain busy in hoarding wealth and enjoying pleasures, and value them. They are very clever and expert in worldly affairs. They learn different types of arts and crafts, make several inventions, regard the worldly achievements as their progress, glorify worldly things, perform austere penance in order to enjoy pleasures by living forever, worship gods, and recite sacred text, incantation etc. But an enlightened, liberated, exalted soul and strivers perceive all this as dark. They don't attach the least importance to such a progress, because from their viewpoint the entire world up to the abode of Brahma has no existence at all. Gita 2/16, Abrahma Bhuvanaloka Punaravartana Arjuna, Gita 8/16. The worldly people remain engrossed in worldly affairs and think that there is nothing besides these pleasures. Gita 2:42, Gita 16:11. Spirituality is beyond the access of their intellect. But a striver following the spiritual path besides knowing spirituality also knows the world. Therefore the term Pasita has been used for them. The worldly people perceive only the night. They remain asleep in the dark. They don't perceive the day, divinity, but a yogi perceives the day as well as the night, the worldly pleasures and prosperity as dark. This is the difference between the two. For example, a child has perceived only childhood, not youth, but an old man besides perceiving the old age has also perceived childhood and youth. A hoarder of wealth doesn't know renunciation, while a renunciate who has renounced the mundane wealth knows the value of collection of wealth and also its renunciation. This is a rule that a man engrossed in worldly affairs cannot know the reality about the world. By keeping himself aloof from the world, he can know the reality about the world because in fact he is separate from the world. Similarly, a person can realize God by identifying himself with God because he, the self, has his identity with God. He who is established in is knows both is and not, but he who is established in not does not know, perceive, even not in its reality as ever non-existent. Then how will he know is, the real? He can't know. He has no capacity to know them. He who knows is does not bear ill will with the person who assumes the existence of not, but the person who assumes the existence of not bears ill will with the person who knows is. Link: the world is just like a dark night to the seer. Then how does he live in the world? The answer to these queries is provided in the verse that follows. Just as waters of different rivers enter the ocean, which though full, remains undisturbed, likewise the man in whom all enjoyments are merged and attains tranquility, but not he who hankers after such enjoyments. 70 Comment: in the rainy season rivers expand and are flooded by heavy rainstorms. All the rivers continue to pour themselves into an ocean, but its magnitude remains the same. In summer, when heat evaporates the water of rivers and these become narrow with shallow water, Even then the expanse of an ocean remains the same. It is ever full and never seeks water from streams and rivers. It means that it ever remains satiated, and always within limits. Here the term klima has not been used for desires but for the objects of pleasures which are desired. Self-controlled seer is like an ocean. He also comes across worldly enjoyments, but these all merge in him without causing any perturbation or agitation in his body and mind. Thus, he attains supreme peace. This peace is not due to mundane objects, but it emanated from God realization. Gita 2:46. In this illustration the realized soul is compared to an ocean and the water of the river is compared to mundane objects. Both the water of the ocean and that of the river are of the same category. But the realized soul is quite different in nature. There is a world of difference between the two. The perfect soul is sentient, eternal, real, limitless and endless, while the enjoyments are insentient, perishable, unreal, limited and have an end. Secondly, the waters of rivers enter the ocean and merge in it, but the mundane objects flowing towards the enlightened soul do not reach the self. These merely reach his body and inner sense. Thus the illustration of a river and the ocean, though is not fully applicable here. It only describes the state of one's body and inner sense. This does not explain the state of his real self. Worldly enjoyments and pleasures cannot satisfy a man who hankers after them. He can never be satisfied. He can never be free from desires, anxieties and burning sensation. So how can he attain peace? The reason is that the insentient cannot satisfy the sentient. The sentient can be satisfied only by sentient. Appendix. It is because of one's desire that this world appears to be insentient matter, but actually it is none other than the Supreme Soul, Divinity, God, Vasudeva Sarvam. Gita 7119. Gita 9119. When a person is freed from desires, all objects get pleased with him. How to know it? We know it because necessities automatically come to such a person without any effort. The things are eager to approach him for being fruitful through utilization by him. But availability or non-availability of objects does not arouse any morbid feelings in him, because he has no desire. From his viewpoint objects have no value, importance. On the other hand, a person having desires always remains perturbed, disquiet, whether he receives things or not. Link now. Lord Krishna concludes the answer to the last question. How does the man of steadfast wisdom walk? What is his mode of conduct? He who gives up all desires and moves about without a sense of mine and egoism and shuns the thirst for necessities of life, attains tranquility. 71. Comment. An earnest wish for something is kamana, desire, while an earnest wish for acquiring or preserving necessities of life is spriha, thirst. A man of steadfast wisdom lies devoid of longings and desires and has no thirst for acquiring or preserving even the necessities of life, as he has attained the supreme bliss, for which the human body was bestowed upon him. So, he becomes free from all cares and does not mind even if his body lives or dies. In this verse, as well as in the 55th verse of this chapter, emphasis has been laid on renunciation of desires, because in the discipline of disinterested action, without abandoning these no striver can possess steadfast wisdom. A striver has affinity for the world only because of desires. If desires are given up, no affinity for the world remains. Mama, a man of stable wisdom, has not the least sense of mind, with men, things and even his body and senses, because he has received them from the world. Therefore, they belong to the world, not to him. It is a blunder to have a sense of possession over things acquired. On rectification of this blunder, the sense of possession over persons, objects, body and sense organs is totally wiped out. I am this body. To have this notion is egoism. The realized soul is free from the egoism. The body, sense organs, mind and intellect are visible in some light. This ego is also perceived in this light. From the viewpoint of this light, all these are objects of perception. An onlooker, seer, is quite different from the seen. This is the rule. With this realization, a man of steady wisdom becomes quite free from egoism. A man of steadfast wisdom attains peace. It does not mean that he attains peace after being free from desire, thirst for enjoyment, attachment and egoism. The fact is that peace is inherent and spontaneous. But a man by having desires to enjoy worldly pleasures cannot realize that peace. But, As soon as he becomes free from desire, thirst for necessities, a sense of mine and egoism, he can realize that peace. In the verse, out of the four desires, thirst for necessities, the sense of mine and egoism is more important than the other three, because a striver after becoming free from egoism, becomes free from the other three also. If there is no egoism, how will the sense of mine persist? Who will desire and for whom will he desire? Now the question arises, when the renunciation of desire etc. is also included in the renunciation of egoism, why has Lord Krishna described the renunciation of desire separately? The answer is, that out of these four desires gross while thirst for necessities is subtle, the sense of mine, subtler, and egoism the subtlest. So, by abandoning desire, it becomes easy to abandon the other three. Nothing can be gained merely by desire. What is destined, we will get. Having such a faith, we should discard desires. Spriha is a subtle form of desire. In the absence of desire even it persists. Spriha, is the desire to have bare necessities of life. In its fulfillment also we are not free. Whatever is to happen, will happen. Then why should we have spriha? When we cease to be dependent on food, water and clothing, spriha is destroyed. After renouncing desires and spriha, the sense of mind in the body remains. It is not a rule that this possessive spirit preserves articles and these are ruined without this spirit. Therefore, the possessive spirit serves no purpose. With renunciation of all the three desire, spriha, subtle desire, and possessive spirit, renunciation of ego becomes very easy. Otherwise it is very difficult. How to get rid of egoism and a sense of mine. From the standpoint of the discipline of disinterested action, karmaga, nothing is mine because I have no independent claim on things, persons, circumstances, incidents and situations etc. When nothing is mine, it means that I need nothing as I need food, water and clothes for the body, only if it is mine, but if it is not mine, I need nothing for it. When there is clear understanding that nothing is mine and I need nothing, there is no question of egoism, feeling of, because egoism persists by accepting affinity for the body, things and circumstances etc. The fact is that the so-called body of mine has an affinity for the world, so it should be used to render service to the world, because I for myself need nothing. By having this sort of feeling, egoism perishes and a striver becomes free from egoism and a sense of mine. From the standpoint of discipline of knowledge, every man has the knowledge that I am. In I is a fragment of nature and am denotes reality, eternal existence. This am is used with I in the absence of, am will not stand, only is will remain. I am, you are, this is and that is. All these four are in respect of individuals, space and time. This is limited conception. If this limited conception is not maintained, then universal is remains. When a striver is established in this universal is, he becomes completely free from the sense of I and mine. From the standpoint of discipline of devotion, Bhakti Yogaj, what is called I or mine actually belongs to God, because had the persons, things, body been mine, I might have protected them from decay and possessed them forever. But it is not so. It means that the so-called body of mine, senses, mind, intellect etc., are his and I am also his. By having this sort of feeling, a striver becomes free from the sense of mine and from egoism. Appendix: the Lord by the expression Samartat Vyakalpate, Gita 2:15, explained attainment of perfection by Jnanaga. Now by the expression Sasandhi Madhagakati he mentions the perfection by Karmaga. It means that by being established in pure consciousness, self, immortality is attained, and by renouncing matter, ego, tranquility, peace, is attained. Egoism really does not exist, it is merely assumed in the self. If it had really existed, we could not have been free from egoism, and the Lord would have also not told us to be free from egoism. But the Lord mentions Nirahankara, so it means that we can be free from egoism. This is also our experience, that the self is free from egoism. In sound sleep egoism disappears while the self exists. This is clearly perceived when we arise from sleep. In sound sleep egoism merges in avidya, ignorance, but the self remains. Therefore after arising from the sleep, remembering that, we say I slept so comfortably that I knew nothing. This memory proves that he, the self, who slept comfortably and who knew nothing, was there. Otherwise, who experienced comfort and who knew nothing? In I knew nothing there is no egoism, and he who had this knowledge is the self, free from egoism. A woman's nose ring fell into a well. A man got down into the well in order to search the nose ring out. He searched it out and was very pleased. But at that time he could not utter any word, because voice, an evolute of fire, and water are opposites. Therefore after coming out of water he could speak that he had found out the nose ring. Similarly, in sound sleep, at the merger of egoism and ignorance, a man feels that he enjoyed a carefree sleep, but he can't express it at that time because there is no means to utter words. After arising from the sound sleep he has the memory of that joy, comfort. Memory is born of experience. Thus in sound sleep everyone feels that egoism does not persist, but no one feels that the self does not exist. Egoism can't persist without us, but we, self, can live without egoism and do live. Our self is consciousness solidified. This eternal entity is not dependent on anyone, but everyone is dependent upon it. If we had not been different from egoism, we would have been only in the form of egoism. Then in sound sleep at the merger of egoism we would have also no existence. But we exist. It proves that we have our existence without egoism. In wakefulness and dream, egoism appears, and in sound sleep egoism merges, but we, the self, ever exist. What neither appears nor merges is our identity. Having given up all the desires, for the maintenance of the body some requirement of things, persons is felt, that is called spra, necessity. Not to talk of the necessities for the maintenance of the body. The man of steadfast wisdom does not even need the body, because the necessity of the body makes a man dependent. Necessity is born only when a man accepts a thing as his own which is not his. A karmagi does not accept anything as his own and for him, but he regards it as the world's and for the world only. So he has no necessity. Kamana, desire, and spra, necessity. Renunciation of both means that there should not be any desire for things and there should not be any necessity for the maintenance of the body. The reason is that the desire for the maintenance of the body is also enjoyment of pleasure. Not only this, but even the wind for peace, salvation and self-realization is kamana, desire. Therefore real disinterestedness consists in not having desire even for salvation. In this verse there is prohibition, negation, of a paraprakriti, lower or insentient nature. The jiva, the embodied soul, because of egoism has sustained a paraprakriti, universe, yada ajriyat jagat, Gita 7:5. Therefore by being free from egoism, the dhatya or nature is negated, affinity is renounced, and the self, soul, becomes free from the bondage of birth and death. If everything is renounced, even then egoism remains, persists, but if egoism is renounced, everything is renounced. Link in the next verse, there is description of a person and his condition, as a result of being free from desire, thirst for necessities of life, the sense of mine and egoism, and closes the subject. O Partha, such is the state of a God-realized soul. Having attained this state, he overcomes delusion. Being established in this state, even at the hour of death, he attains Brahmic bliss, identification with the absolute state. 72 Comment. This is the Brahmi state, viz., the state of a God-realized soul. On being free from egoism, individuality is completely wiped out, and then a striver is automatically established in God. Individuality persisted only due to affinity with the world. With renunciation of affinity, individuality is completely gone. The term asa refers to very near. It denotes the expressions vayakaman, giving up desires, nispraha, free from thirst for necessities, nirmama, free from the sense of mine, and nirahankara, free from egoism, used in the preceding verse. Having heard the Lord's declaration, when your intellect transcends the mire of delusion and confusion, by hearing conflicting doctrines, you will realize union with God. Arjuna was inquisitive to know about that state of union with God. So Arjuna raised 4 questions, in order to know the marks of a man of steadfast wisdom. Having answered those 4 questions, the Lord declares here that this is a state of godhood, union with God. In this state of eternal union with God, no individuality remains, only the divinity pervades. In order to point out this important fact, the Lord addresses Arjuna as Partha here. So long as a man has egoism, the feeling of I, in the body, he is deluded. Lack of discrimination between the real and the unreal is delusion. The man's self being real, If he identifies himself with the unreal, this identification is delusion. When a striver knows the unreal as unreal, his affinity to it ceases and he realizes that he is already established in the real. With this realization he is never deluded. Gita 4:35. The human body has been bestowed upon man, only for God realization. So the Lord gives an opportunity, even to vilest sinner, to attain him by establishing himself in him, even at the time of death, viz., by breaking off his affinity with matter. Lord Krishna has also announced it, in the 30th verse of the 7th chapter, one who knows my integral being, comprising Adibhita, the field of matter, Adideva, Brahma, and Adayagya, the unmanifest divinity, even at the time of death, attains me. Similarly, he has also announced in the 5th verse of the 8th chapter, he who departs from this body, thinking of me alone, even at the time of death, attains me. There is no doubt about it. By the above expression, the Lord declares the glory of this Brahmi state, Godhood. By being established in this state, even at the time of death, one attains Brahma. As the Lord declared about equanimity that even a little practice of it protects one from great fear, of birth and death, 240, so he declares here that if one gets established in this Brahmi state, even at the time of death by breaking off his affinity with matter, he attains Brahma. Attachment to matter, by knowing the unreal as unreal, a man becomes free from it, because in fact the unreal has no existence. The unreal seems to exist in the light of the real. If a person does not become free from the unreal even after knowing it is unreal, it proves that he has not actually known it. Self is the only obstacle to the attainment of this state. If a person renounces the attachment, even at the time of death, he realizes his real axiomatic state of godhood. Now, a question arises, how a man who could not attain God throughout his life, attains him at the time of death, when his body and intellect both grow weak? The answer is that man's union with him is natural, only he has to realize this fact, and this can be realized, either by God's or saint's grace or by good influences of past actions. The word api, even, means that during life if he attains a state of godhood, Brahmi state, he becomes a liberated soul. But, even at the time of death if he becomes free from a sense of mine and egoism, he attains him immediately without any sort of practice, meditation and trance etc. By using the terms Brahmanirvanam, oneness with Brahma, Lord Krishna means to say, that the striver of the discipline of disinterested action, Kanaga, attains the same Brahma as striver of the discipline of knowledge, Jnanaga, Gita 5:24-26. The same fact has been pointed out, in the 5th verse of the 5th chapter when he declares, the supreme state which is attained by a Sankhyogi, the follower of the discipline of knowledge, is attained also by the Kanagi, the follower of the discipline of disinterested action. Something noteworthy, a man himself is sentient but he accepts his affinity for the insentient. Therefore, instead of attaining salvation or God realization, he goes to ruin. By using his discrimination he aims to attain God, while out of delusion he wants to have affinity to the matter. Delusion is born of egoism, and a sense of mine or desire. To accept the body as I or mine is, delusion born of egoism, a sense of mine, while the wish to acquire or preserve something, is the delusion born of desire. Arjuna, like other worldly people, had delusion born of egoism and a sense of mine, as well as desire. In the sentence used in the 1st chapter, we who are righteous persons clearly see the sin, is an example of delusion, born of egoism. These kinsmen will be destroyed, is that of delusion born of the sense of mine and we should not fight otherwise, we shall incur sin and go to hell, is that born of desire. To remove this delusion, Lord Krishna has talked about two kinds of discrimination: a discrimination between the real and the unreal, 2:11:30, and discrimination between discharging one's duty and abandoning it, 2:31:53. While discriminating between the body and the soul, Lord Krishna explained that there was never a time when he or those kings were non-existent, nor they would cease to exist in future. It is a fact that these bodies did not exist before, nor will they exist in future, and in the interim also, they are changing every moment, as every born one passes through babyhood, youth and old age. He also explained that as a man discarding worn-out clothes, takes new ones, likewise, the embodied soul, casting off worn-out bodies, enters into others. which are new. So he should not grieve. While explaining discrimination between discharging one's duty and abandoning it, he said, "There is nothing more welcome for a man of the warrior class than a righteous war, which is an open gateway to heaven. If you do not wage it, you will incur sin. But if you fight treating pleasure and pain, gain and loss, victory and defeat, alike, you will not incur sin. Your right is to perform your duty, but never to its fruit. Let not the fruit of action be your object, nor let your attachment be to an action. Therefore perform your duty being fixed in yoga, because equanimity consists in remaining even-minded, in success and failure. A man who, endowed with equanimity, performs his duty, becomes free from virtues and vices in his lifetime. When your intellect transcends the mire of delusion, and the confusion by hearing conflicting statements, it becomes poised and firmly fixed, in meditation, on God, you will attain union with God. Appendix: the striver devoid of the sense of mind and egoism gets dissociated from the material world called as at division and realizes his natural owner abidance in Brahma, i.e., Sat division. This abidance is known as Brahmistiti. Having attained this state, no owner of this body remains. In other words, there is none who assumes this body as I or mine, and individuality is wiped out. It means that our reality is not dependent on egoism. Even rid of egoism, ever reality stands, which is called Brahmistiti or abidance in Brahma. Once this Brahmistiti, eternal union, is realized, then a man never gets deluded. Gita 4:35. If even at the time of death, being free from the sense of mind and egoism, he realizes this Brahmistiti, state of godhood, he attains Brahmic bliss, identification with the absolute state, immediately. By being free from the sense of mind and egoism, Brahma, the absolute, or enlightenment is attained. Then a man becomes free from the sense of mind, from desire and from doership. The reason is that the embodied soul has sustained the universe because of egoism. Gita 3127, Jivabhyaturn Mahabhayoyadrandrayat Jagat. Gita 7:5. If he renounces egoism, the universe will not exist anymore. Having attained the absolute, if he has the latencies or impressions of devotion, he will know God in entirety naturally, because the universal soul is the support of Brahma. Nothing is mine. By accepting this truth, a man becomes free from the sense of mine. I need nothing. By accepting this fact, a man becomes free from the interested motive. I have to do nothing for myself. By accepting it, a man becomes free from egoism. Thus with the words Om, Tat, Sat, the names of the Lord, in the Upanishad of the Bhagavad Gita, the knowledge of Brahma, the Supreme, the scripture on yoga, and the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna, the second chapter, entitled Sankhyoga, ends. In the discipline of knowledge, discrimination occupies an important place, and Lord Krishna started his gospel with this discipline. So this chapter is designated Sankhyoga. Words, letters and avakya, said, in the second chapter. 1. In this chapter in Atharvaveda there are 3 words, in Sanjaya avakya, Sribhagavanuvakya etc. there are 14 words, in verses there are 957 words, and there are 13 concluding words. Thus the total number of the words is 987. 2. In this chapter in Atharvaveda there are 7 letters, in Sanjaya avakya, Snohigavanavakya etc. there are 45 letters, in verses there are 2,403 letters, and there are 45 concluding letters. Thus the total number of the letters is 2,500. In this chapter, out of the 72 verses, the 5th, 7th, 8th, 20th, 22nd and 70th in each there are 44 letters. In the 6th verse there are 46 letters, in the 29th verse there are 45 letters, and in each of the remaining verses there are 32 letters. 3. In this chapter Avaya, said, has been used 7 times, Safaja avakya twice, 3 times Snohigvanuvakya, Arjuna avakya twice. Meter used in the second chapter s. Out of the 72 verses of this chapter, the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 20th, 22nd, 29th and 70th, these 8 verses are of Upajati meter. In the first quarter of the 52nd and 67 verses, Nagana being used, there is Navipula meter in the first quarter of the 12th, 26th and 32nd verses, and in the third quarter of the 61st and 63rd verses, Ragana being used there is Ravpula meter in the first quarter of the 36th and 56th verses. Bhagana being used there is Bhavapula meter in the first quarter of the 71st verse and in the third quarter of the 31st verse. Magana being used there is Mavipula meter in the first quarter of the 46th verse. Sagana being used there is Savipula meter in the first and third quarters of the 35th verse. Nagana being used there is Jatapaksavipula meter in the 47th verse in the first quarter. Bhagana and in the third quarter. Nagana being used there is Saralkantavipula meter. The remaining 49 verses have of the right Pathyavaktra Anusdup meter. 2 Sri Hari 2 3rd chapter introduction. The teaching of Hila is based on man's experience. While starting this gospel, from 2:11, Lord Krishna first of all clarifies that the body and the soul are totally different from each other. The body is transitory, unreal, limited and perishable, while the soul is eternal, real, omnipresent and imperishable. Therefore, one should neither feel sad at the destruction of the perishable nor should have a desire to maintain the imperishable. This is called discrimination. This discrimination is very essential in all the three disciplines of action, knowledge, and devotion. When a man discriminates the self from the body, the desire for salvation is aroused. Not to speak of salvation, even the desire for heaven etc., is aroused, when a man regards his own self as different from the body. Therefore, the Lord starts his gospel with discrimination. This topic of discrimination begins with the 11th verse of the 2nd chapter and continues up to the 30th verse. The Lord, instead of using philosophical terminology, has used simple terms to enable people to understand the topic easily. It means that every person deserves God realization because the human body has been bestowed upon us, only to realize Him. So, every human being can realize God, by giving due importance to discrimination. For this topic, even the term intellect has not been used by the Lord. In order to distinguish the real from the unreal, the imperishable from the perishable, the eternal from the transitory and the soul, spirit, from the body, there is need only for discrimination rather than intellect. Discrimination is beyond intellect. As Prakriti, nature, and Purusa, spirit, both are without beginning, Gita 13:19, so is discrimination, which distinguishes the real from the unreal. This discrimination has been bestowed upon all creatures by God, and it is revealed in the intellect. Birds and beasts also know what should or should not be eaten. Even trees and creeping plants feel hot and cold and experience favorable and unfavorable circumstances. Human beings are specially endowed with this discrimination, which can release them from the bondage of birth and death and leads them to eternal quietude and bliss. When this discrimination is aroused, i.e., when a man can distinguish between the spirit and the body, his affinity for the world, including senses, mind and intellect, is renounced and his intellect becomes purified and equanimous. In the discipline of action the resolute intellect is single, Gita 2:41. When a man firmly resolves that he has to attain salvation, favorable or unfavorable circumstances are no obstacle and thus he attains equanimity, without making any effort. When a man resolves to attain God realization, his attachment and attraction for the world begins to disappear. Attachment to pleasure and prosperity is the main obstacle to the attainment of a resolute intellect. Gita 2:44. Having laid emphasis on resolute intellect, in the discipline of action, the Lord asks Arjuna, specially to perform his duty with equanimity. He declares, "You have a right to action alone, but never at all to its fruit." 2:47. Perform your duty being steadfast in yoga. 2:48. Viz. Equanimity. The Lord also declares, far inferior to the yoga of wisdom, is action. 2149, i.e., action performed for its fruit, is far inferior to the yoga of wisdom, equanimity. He further declares, seek thou refuge in the discipline of knowledge. There is predominance of discrimination. In the discipline of devotion there is predominance of reverence and faith, while in the discipline of action there is predominance of resolute intellect. But it does not mean that in a discipline of action there are no discrimination, reverence and faith. What it means is that resolute intellect predominates. Similarly, in the disciplines of knowledge and devotion also there is resolute intellect. Verse 1-249. In equanimity. Then he declares, endowed with wisdom, evenness of mind, One casts middle. Off during this life both good and evil deeds, therefore devote thyself to yoga. Yoga is skill in action. 250 Arjuna had already made up his mind not to fight. So in the 31st verse of the first chapter, he said, I do not foresee any good in slaying my kith and kin. Then in the 45th verse, he says, what a great sin have we decided to commit, by preparing ourselves to slay our own people. In the 5th verse of the second chapter, Arjuna says, it is better to live by begging, than to slay these honored teachers, elders. In the 3rd verse of the second chapter, Lord Krishna directs Arjuna to arise, shaking off his petty faint-heartedness, while Arjuna declared his determination not to fight. In the 9th verse of the second chapter, listener cannot understand what a preacher preaches, if he is already full of prejudice. That is why, Arjuna could not have a thorough grasp of the topic explained to him by Lord Krishna. He could not make out the real meaning of Lord Krishna's words. These appeared to him to be ambiguous and confusing. So Arjuna puts questions to Lord Krishna in the next 2 verses, in order to get his doubt cleared. Arjuna said, if you think that knowledge is superior to action, 0 Janardana, Krishna, why then do you make me do a dreadful deed, 0 Kasava, Krishna? With your complex words you seem to bewilder my mind, therefore, tell me plainly the one principle, by which I may attain the august good. 1-2 Comment Janardana. By this term Arjuna means to suggest, that as God fulfills desires of his devotees he will undoubtedly fulfill his desire also. It's a common human weakness, that one puts queries to others with a view to getting a response, which would support his own views. It is cowardice, because valor consists in carrying out the instructions of the preacher whether these are favorable or hostile. It is because of this weakness or cowardice, that he experiences difficulty in unfavorable circumstances. When he finds himself unable to face the unfavorable circumstances, he disguises himself as a good man, i.e., the evil masquerades itself as a virtue. It is very difficult to renounce this sort of evil. In the case of Arjuna also, the evil of the renunciation of his duty has disguised itself as a virtue of non-violence. So, he regards knowledge as superior to action and asks Lord Krishna, why he urges him to do a savage deed, of fighting. The Lord, in the 39th verse of the second chapter, referred to equanimity, evenness of mind, but Arjuna took it to be knowledge. Therefore, he tells the Lord, that he had already told him, this, which has been taught to thee, is wisdom concerning Sankhyoga, discipline of knowledge, but now listen to wisdom concerning Karmaga, discipline of action, endowed with which, thou shalt cast off the bondage of action. He had also told him, action is far inferior to the discipline of wisdom, knowledge. 249. Thus, if according to the Lord, knowledge is superior to action, he should not urge him to be engaged, even in virtuous actions such as oblation, charity and penance etc., which are sanctioned by Scripture. But still, he is urging him to do the savage deed of the slaughter of warriors, in the war. Why? First, Arjuna, filled with enthusiasm, ordered Lord Krishna to place his chariot between the two armies so that he could observe the warriors, eager for battle. But, when Lord Krishna, having placed the chariot between the two armies, in front of Bhisma and Drona and other kings, asked Arjuna to behold those Kurus assembled there, his delusion, because of his attachment to his kinsman, was aroused. So he thought knowledge to be superior to action, as in the case of knowledge a man has not to perform such savage deeds as the slaughter of warriors in a war. So Arjuna asks Lord Krishna, why he urges him to perform such a savage deed. Here the term buddhi has been taken in the sense of knowledge, otherwise he would not have put this question. If Arjuna had understood equanimity by the term buddhi, then the Lord's statement would have not appeared as confusing. The reason is, that the Lord, in the 48th verse of the second chapter, had already asked him to perform action being steadfast in equanimity. Using the term confusing words will be purposeful only, when there might have been two contentions in the mind of Arjuna, and only then this question might arise, if you consider knowledge superior to action, then why do you urge me to take savage action? In the 3rd chapter, in response to Arjuna's question, Lord Krishna declares, that in this world there are two disciplines, the discipline of knowledge and the discipline of action. It means, that Arjuna took the meaning of the term buddhi to be knowledge. A striver can receive the correct answer to his question, only if he puts it with faith and reverence. Arjuna has full faith in Lord Krishna and holds him in great reverence. Therefore, his question shows that he is even prepared to perform the savage deed of fighting, in order to attain salvation. Arjuna says that sometimes he asks him to perform his duty, 248, while another time he asks him to seek refuge in knowledge, 2149. Thus, within seemingly mixed words, he seems to bewilder his mind, i.e., Arjuna is not able to understand whether he should perform his duty or take refuge in knowledge. Here, the use of the term eva, as it were, 2 times, shows Arjuna's reverence for Lord Krishna. It is because of this reverence for the Lord that he regards the utterance of the Lord as true, thinking that he is not confusing him. But because of his own lack of understanding, the Lord's utterance seems to him to be perplexing and it bewilders his mind. Had the Lord, in fact, bewildered his mind, then who would have removed his delusion? Tadkaral Vadaniskutyayanasrayo Amapniyam. Arjuna requests Lord Krishna to tell him decisively one principle either of action or of knowledge, by which he may attain the highest good or bliss. Arjuna is repeating the same request which he had already mentioned. Tell me decisively what is good for me. 2f7. Appendix. So long as we assume, the existence of the world, an action seems dreadful or pleasant. The reason is that by cognizing the entity of the world, we have our eye on an action rather than on our duty. But when we mind our duty, the action does not seem dreadful or pleasant. Link. The Lord, in the next 3, 3rd, 4th and 5th verses, answers the complex words said in the first 2 verses. The blessed Lord said, O sinless Arjuna, in this world to achieve equanimity a twofold path has been enunciated by me before, the path of knowledge, for men of renunciation, Sankhyogi, and the path of action, for men of action, Karmyogi. 3. Comment. Arjuna did not want to fight, so he misunderstood the term buddhi, intellect, which stands for equanimity, but he took it to mean knowledge. But the Lord had already used the terms buddhi and buddhāga for equanimity, 2139, 49 etc. Therefore, here also Lord Krishna is describing equanimity which can be acquired by both the disciplines of knowledge and action. In Aga, the question put by Arjuna, how to attain on the highest good or bliss, shows his freedom from sin, because the keen desire to attain bliss destroys all the sins of a striver. Loksmandvavaldhanitha praktamaya. Here, the term joka denotes human body, because both the disciplines of knowledge and action can be practiced only in human life. The term nistha stands for equanimity, which can be attained either through the discipline of knowledge or the discipline of action. In order to distinguish the two, the Lord, in the 39th verse of the 2nd chapter, declared, this is equanimity concerning Sakya, which has been taught to you, from the 11th to the 30th verses. Now listen about equanimity concerning yoga, discipline of action, from the 39th to the 53rd verses. The term pura also denotes time immemorial, as well as the immediate past. Here it has been used in the latter sense, i.e., in the preceding chapter, when doubt arose in Arjuna's mind. In both the disciplines which have already been described in the preceding chapter, there is no mention of the renunciation of actions. Something remarkable here, Lord Krishna has mentioned 2 disciplines, the discipline of Sakya, knowledge, and the discipline of yoga, action. Corresponding to the 2 types of disciplines there are 2 types of purusas in this world. Gita 15/16. These are, the perishable, mortal world, and the imperishable, immortal self. To remain equanimous in success and failure, gain and loss of the perishable is known as the discipline of action, while having a disinclination for the perishable and being established in the imperishable is the discipline of knowledge. But above these 2 there is the Supreme Person who is beyond the perishable, and is superior to the imperishable, as described in the scriptures, and the Veda, 15:18. Thus a wholehearted surrender to the Lord is called the discipline of devotion. Therefore, in the discipline of action there is predominance of the perishable, in the discipline of knowledge there is predominance of the imperishable, while in the discipline of devotion there is predominance of God, Supreme Person. The state of nistha, equanimity, can be attained by strivers, either through knowledge or through action, but identification in fact in both Karanaga and Jnanaga our relation with God remains established. God himself has prescribed these disciplines, yogas, For the salvation of man, the strivers following these two disciplines carry out the rules prescribed by God. The only thing is that the striver following these two disciplines does not totally depend upon God. With the Lord, is not their own. Nistjan Sankhya state strivers experience distinctly the existence of their own selves, as well as that of the world, and try to cut asunder the affinity for the world. A Karanagi offers to the world everything, including even his body, that he has derived from it, and removes affinity from the world. In this way, both of them get established in their true form, the self. But in the state of wholehearted surrender to God, a striver in the beginning does not feel the existence of God, but he believes that there exists something unique, God, which is above and apart from the self, as well as the world. Thus he accepts God with a firm belief and faith and dedicates himself to him. Therefore, in Sankhya and Yoga, there is predominance of knowing, whereas accepting, faith, is of much import in Bhagavanistha. There is no difference between knowing and accepting. Accepting is equally indubitable, firm, as knowing. There is no scope for a debate for an accepted thing. A child takes its mother to be its own. No doubt ever crops up in its mind. Therefore, in Gita, wherever the term knowing has been used with reference to Bhakti Yoga, it should be taken as accepting. Similarly, in connection with Jnanaga and Karanaga, the term accepting should be taken to mean knowing. The state of equanimity depends on the disciplines of the Jnanagi and Karanagi, but in Bhagavanistha the devotee depends entirely on the grace of God. The discipline of devotion has been described in the Gita time and again. In this chapter also, the Lord, having described the disciplines of knowledge and action, explains the discipline of devotion in the 30th verse, by declaring, "Surrender all actions to me." Similarly, in the 5th chapter also, having described the two disciplines, in the 10th verse, he declares, "The knower of truth performs actions offering these to God," while, at the end of the chapter, he declares that he is the enjoyer of sacrifices and austerities and so on. Jnanasankhyanam, these are modes of nature, praukti, which act on the modes, Gita 3:28, and so a striver is not related to them. Thus, by thinking so, when a striver renounces the agency of doership in all actions, it is known as the discipline of knowledge, Jnanaga. At the beginning of the Gospel of the Gita, while describing Sphuric Yoga, the discipline of knowledge, the Lord clarifies the imperishable self from the perishable body, by terming these as sat, real, and as at, unreal. Gita 2/16. Karmajna Yoganam, the discipline of action, consists in performing one's duty according to one's caste, stage of life, nature, circumstances, according to the ordinance of the scriptures, renouncing attachment to it and desire for its fruit, and remaining equanimous in success and failure. The Lord has primarily described the discipline of action in the 47th and 48th verses of the 2nd chapter. In the 47th verse, there is mention of the principle of the discipline of action, while in the 48th verse, there is description of the method of performing action. Appendix Karmaga and Jnanaga. These two paths being in the world are worldly lokas mind vivihanistha. In Karmaga there is predominance of Ksaro, perishable, world, while in Jnanaga there is predominance of Aksaro, embodied soul, imperishable. The perishable and the imperishable also are there in the world only. Dvavimal Puruzalokzaraskaksara eva ca. Gita 15/16. Therefore Karmaga and Jnanaga both are worldly paths. By attaching importance to the soul, self, and the world, there are two paths. If without attaching importance to the soul and the world, importance is attached only to God, there are not two paths but there is only one unworldly path of Bhagavanistha, devotion. In worldly paths, Karmaga Jnanaga, a striver's endeavor is important. In practicing the spiritual discipline, a striver holds that his effort is predominant. But when a striver practices spiritual discipline by depending on God without considering his effort as dominant, then his path is unworldly, divine. The reason is that by being connected with God all becomes unworldly. Unless and until there is affinity for God, all is worldly. Neither think others as evildoers, nor wish evil to others, nor do evil to others. With this outlook Karmaga begins. Nothing is mine, I need nothing, and I have to do nothing for myself. By accepting this truth Jnanaga begins, not by non-performance of actions, Does a man attain freedom from the bondage of actions, nor by mere renunciation does he attain perfection? For comment: in the discipline of action, performance of action is inevitable, because for a sage who wishes to attain success in yoga, action is the means. 6/3. A man has an impulse for action, which can be pacified by the performance of actions, without having any desire for fruits. If a striver performs actions having a desire for fruits, this impulse is not pacified, it is rather enhanced. Now's karmayamas nut: when a striver performs his duty, if he does not perform action, how will he come to know whether he remained equanimous in success and failure or not?